All right. So let's jump in. I guess we've spoken about some pretty intense topics, you and I, but maybe this takes the cake. We'll dive right in. So should I give some background to our audience on how this?
Yeah, tell a story. Yeah.
We'll tell a story. So Rabbi Taub has now that it's three, it's a chazaka, it's an entity. It's done 3 fundraisers so far, charity campaign, and each one around this time of year. And the second one, which is a little over a year ago, Rabbi Taub held a all-day streamathon. We had learning and singers and special guests. So I was one such special guest.
You were one of the special guests, Sally.
Special guests. So now tonight I'm returning the favor. So 12:30 or so on a Saturday night, we begin talking. And I believe I started sharing about how your book on addiction, God of your understanding, God of our understanding, had impacted me. And while I was talking, I shared about my own addiction, my addiction to sex, my addiction to pornography. And shortly thereafter, a day or so later, I get an anonymous email from someone. It's clear from the email address, and I'm sure you've seen this a number of times, that the email address was created specifically for the purpose of sending me this email.
Yes.
And the gentleman says, I signed on to Rabbi Taub's streamathon. I was hoping to hear either a share by him or a singer, Ellie Marcus, but instead I bumped into one of his special guests, quote unquote, and there you are talking about pornography. And I have an addiction. I've tried to stop many times. I haven't shared this with anyone. And he shared how it's affecting his life. I recommended that we get on a call. He was worried about his anonymity. I said, I don't have the technology to figure out who someone's voice is. If you don't tell me who someone is by their voice, if you don't tell me your name, I don't know. We could have a conversation, but I feel I could be more helpful over the phone. So we speak. In the email, actually, he said as much, that he was a rabbi of the community, etc., and he's successful and growing and everything else. But this problem on the side existed. And as we got to talking, I explained to him that at some point in time, he's going to have to talk to his wife about it. He's going to have to attend therapy or meetings, something. You don't heal this on your own. I shared with him my story, but first of all, in a relationship, how it's going to affect. Number 2, which I guess is the topic of tonight, how it's going to affect himself when he has this part of him, this part of his life that he's suddenly working on, and he feels that it's a secret from the people closest to him. And that was that conversation. We continued a dialogue, mostly anonymous, over the course of the year. And about 10 months into our conversation, I get an email one day from his real address, and he tells me how he shared it with his wife, and somehow it even came up with his wife's family. And thank God he's doing much better. He's sober. And in all areas of his life, he feels that things are doing better. So this year, when you invited me again to a more primetime slot on your
you did so well last year, Ali. We decided to bring you on during the normal hours.
Yeah, I hear I heard the numbers started rolling in as soon as I got off the phone. Chaim Cohen, your illustrious host, offered to nickname me Elijah the Prophet and spell prophet Prophet.
Nice.
In any case, I thought that's a Rabbi Shais Taub kind of joke. In any case, I'll finish the story. Someone is asking questions. There's a Q&A section. And should you want to put the question in the Q&A section at some point in time during our conversation, Rabbi Taub or I will mix it into to our thoughts, either address it directly or mix it into our thoughts. In any case, this year when I was invited back, I thought to share the story that, you thought we were just doing a fundraiser, but obviously we're doing something good. If from that fundraiser came a conversation that enabled this guy to share a secret. And how do I know it's good? Because I know from my own life what it was like to live with secrets for so many years. The secret one of my addiction, that was a secret I held for so many years, so much so to the point that my own therapist, who I had opened up with about my other secret, the fact that I was sexually abused as a child, he was the first person I told, I lied to him about the severity of my porn addiction for 5 years. I mentioned, yeah, I watched from time to time, but I never spoke. I was too ashamed to talk to him about the dependency and how many times I tried to stop and what I had done to try to stop and that I couldn't, etc. Anyways, back to here, I share this story again. I share this story on your event this year, and I got an email from someone else. Again,
How soon after?
The same week. I think we spoke on Sunday night. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Saturday or Sunday night. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Sunday for whatever reason. Probably by Tuesday, I got an email from someone.
So a few days.
Yeah, very similar. Email address is created specifically for this purpose. And this person as well shares about an addiction, a little bit more graphic than the previous one. We can choose to share or not share. I'm not sure based on the audience whether it's relevant to share the extent, but it was a sexual addiction that had progressed pretty significantly. And he had this secret, a young adult, and we as well got on the phone. So when I shared this with Rabbi Taub, that, this similar experience, he said, maybe there's something about our conversations that's inspiring people to relieve some of their shame. Why don't we do a webinar specifically about shame? And tonight, we are here talking specifically about shame. So welcome, Rabbi Taub.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Okay, you're the boss.
Yes. So where do I start with this huge topic? I guess where I'd like to go with this is in terms of the let's talk to us. What is the Jewish word for shame? What is the Jewish feeling of shame? What is this? What is this feeling? How is it different than other feelings? How does Judaism understand it? I know from a psychology, Brene Brown, I love her translation of shame, and I'll share what she explains shame. She explains shame as a fear, and it's the fear of not being worthy of connection. And being that humans we're relational beings, we can't live in a vacuum. The worst punishment you can give to someone is solitary confinement. Most people would choose lashes over solitary confinement or extreme pain. It's that disruptive to us as people. So when someone has the fear that they're not worthy of connection, it's effectively emotional solitary confinement. I can't really be in the same room as another person. A mask of me could, a fake version of me, but not me. And that fear of not being worthy of connection is corrosive. It's all encompassing, and it affects literally every area of our life. That's the way she understands it. So I'd love to hear from you, from a Jewish perspective. What is the word for shame? How do we understand it? Is it viewed in the same way? That's my question to kick this off.
Okay. So, it's interesting. I was just having a very interesting discussion last night with my father. May he be well. He was, my mother and father were visiting for Hanukkah, and we had a very interesting discussion last night. Actually, I took video of it. I couldn't resist. I set up the camera in the new studio, and I got a very geschmack half an hour podcast with my father. I don't know if I'll make it public at any point, but my father's a psychologist, and one of the things we were talking about was general semantics, which was a theory that was very fashionable back in the 60s, basically about the way that people relate to words, and they get trapped, they get stuck with certain words. And I won't elaborate now, but it's worthy of another discussion another time. For the context of our present discussion, I'll just say like this. One word can have vastly different meanings, and more poignantly, vastly different experiences. What it's like to experience that which the word describes can be vastly different depending on the context. So even if we'll say there's a word called shame, and in the holy tongue it's called busha or boishas, just knowing that word itself doesn't account for the fact that there can be a vast spectrum of experiences that all can be described with that word. And it can run the gamut from the most holy and sublime to the absolutely most toxic and destructive. Now, I understand that tonight we're probably going to focus more on the destructive kind of shame. That's our...
So John Bradshaw, which is another one of my favorite writers on shame, refers to toxic shame and healthy shame. So
right, yes,
toxic shame.
Right. So let's just first talk about healthy shame, because there is such a thing, and it's a wonderful thing. And it's funny because I think understanding healthy shame can actually help you understand toxic shame. And I'm using Bradshaw's terms, although I'm not going to try to match his definitions, but we'll use those words. Those are good words. You called it, the feeling of being unworthy of a connection.
The fear of being unworthy.
Or the fear of being unworthy of a connection. And that's actually, you said that's from Brown, yeah?
Brene Brown, yeah.
Yeah. And that's pretty aptly a good description of what it talks about in Chassidus, about something called yira boishus. It's an awe. I don't like to use the word fear, because fear is like boogeyman in the closet, right? But a sense of awe, that Hashem is so great, Hashem is so massive, Hashem is so infinite. I don't want to take up space. How can I take up space? If Hashem is the all, then how can there be anything else but him? I just want to dissolve into him. I just want to be part of him. And that's a healthy sense of shame. But let me point out a couple features of that. First of all, it doesn't mean that I'm bad or that I've done anything bad. It's actually not even talking about me. It's talking about him. He's so infinite that even if I were an angel, it would feel inappropriate to be a secondary existence aside from his existence. So that's first.
The term exists, Yira boishus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This sounds like a good thing.
It is a good thing, yeah. So first of all, it's not about me, it's about Hashem. It's not I'm so unworthy, it's that Hashem is so infinite that I don't even want to take up space. I don't want to subtract, so to speak, from his everythingness. But a second important point to realize is that the consequence of this fear is not that, and therefore I should get away from him, and therefore I should go disconnect myself from him, but rather that I should surrender and become one with him. So it's not that I'm going to allow this feeling to create a rift in the relationship. To the contrary, what I'm really fearing is the separation from him. And that if my own, this is a little bit deep here, if my own sense of selfhood is causing me to feel othered, then I'm afraid of that. I don't want that sense of selfhood to be an interruption between me just surrendering and becoming subsumed within the oneness. So the end conclusion is intimacy with God, not going and hiding and running and not trying and thinking that I shouldn't be close to God. Now let's turn that on its head. So toxic shame is the opposite of both of those things. First of all, toxic shame is really not about the greatness of God. It's really self-obsession. It's about how awful I am. And it's not about, and therefore I should surrender and become one with godliness. It's like, now I got to go and have this life that's totally separate from godliness, or a part of my life that's totally separate from godliness.
So you're taking this to shame as disconnection from God. Could it also mean from people? Because I'm sure that's what Brene Brown meant in it, right? The fear of not being worthy of connection. You're just talking about the term Yira boishus.
Yeah, well, you're asking me specifically for the religious mystical definition. So
right,
that's what I gave you. But
you You were saying how Brene Brown's definition jives well with
Yeah, if you
synthesis,
apply
yeah.
if you apply those words to one's God concept, yes.
Right. I mean, if we talk about healthy shame, right? Healthy shame is what lets me know that I'm separate from you, in the sense that when I use the bathroom, I use it when you and others are not in it, right? That's healthy shame. When I go out in public, I get dressed appropriately. I make sure I smell. I carry myself in a certain way, because that would. And healthy shame is what tells someone that, right? This is fully appropriate by yourself. There's nothing terrible about doing these things. Just
Right.
when you go out in public or whatever, or in certain settings, you act in a certain way, you carry yourself in a certain way, and that's what enables connection, right?
Right.
For example, if someone doesn't have that fear, maybe they'll have a toxic smell, as an example, which would make it very difficult to connect with this person, because they don't have this healthy fear of taking care of some basic things. I think when we say toxic shame, there's almost nothing we can do about it. We can't shake it. There's a stain that I can't get off. There's a smell that won't be removed. It just feels so, at least that's the way it feels.
When you're describing healthy shame, or call it even, let me lower the bar even and call it functional shame, or shame that serves us well. Basically, you're describing things that I do out of consideration for others. So it really has nothing to do with me. It's not like I think that I'm so uniquely whatever that I need to hide it from others. It's more like I don't want to impose. So this is similar to what I was saying before about healthy shame or holy shame, where it's not that I'm so bad, it's that Hashem is so great. So also in interpersonal relationships, it's not that I think that you will be devastated if you find out that I have biological functions. It's that out of politeness to you, I'm not going to expose you to that. You understand? It's a difference between, is it about me or is it about you? If I'm trying to, let me change the example. Forget about a shame right now. Let's talk about pride. Let's talk about pride, which is the opposite of shame. Pride can be like, let's say I dress nicely, but am I dressing nicely for me? Am I dressing nicely for you? It's an interesting question. If I'm dressing nicely for me, meaning I want the attention, I want to be known as such a person. So that's the focus is on self. I'm dressing nicely because I want to show you that I respect the fact that we're meeting together and I want to be presentable and I want to make a pleasant presentation, just like if I were to tidy my office, if you were to come over and have a meeting with me, right? So I would put on a clean tie if you're coming to have a meeting with me, right? So again, it's not about me, it's about you. I'm trying to be polite. I'm trying to show consideration for you. It's not that I think there's anything that's wrong with me that needs to be fixed, and certainly nothing that needs to be hidden. It's just I'm trying to make you comfortable. So that's called being polite. And there's nothing wrong.
You're using a word often when describing it, things like something has to be hidden or not known or a secret. I don't know if you use the word secret, but I think
I didn't use the word secret, but yeah, that's
hidden a couple of times. Yeah.
Right.
The word hidden a couple. So I think that's an important distinction. When I think back to what started this conversation, right? You're talking about two emails that I received from people that they sent anonymously. In other words, they wanted to hide their name. Here they were writing the details.
And let me just chime in here. The reason that they wrote an anonymous name wasn't because they were afraid of offending you.
Correct.
It wasn't about their concern for you. It was they felt they had to hide something for themselves.
Correct.
And that's where you start to see the hallmarks of the toxicity. In other words, polite people don't discuss certain things with others, even though everybody, there's a saying, everybody knows what happens after a chuppah, but polite people don't discuss it. There's nothing shameful about it.
Right.
It's just not something, it's private. And maybe we should talk about the distinction between secrecy and privacy. But again, going back to the examples of these emails, they didn't make it anonymous because they were afraid Ellie Nash is going to be so shocked by what I'm going to tell him that I want to shield him from it. They weren't trying to shield you.
Right.
They felt there was something repulsive within them that needed to be shielded.
Correct. So maybe it is appropriate to explain the difference between privacy and secrecy, because I think it matches well with what you're saying. So privacy, I don't know where I heard this, but I've been repeating it for a while. So private is something that I share only with specific people. Sometimes it's myself, but I only share it with specific people. And a secret is something that I keep from specific people. So for example, someone may not want their wife to know about a detail, but they'd be perfectly comfortable meeting a stranger on the train and talking about this thing, because whatever this thing is that they're keeping hidden from their wife, but they don't want their wife, a specific person, to know. So I think privacy and secrecy are polar opposites. One is about who do I share this with? For example, it's not a secret that you and I have a bank account. It's private how much is in it. It's not something you don't walk around announcing it. It's just not a decent. It's not a decent way of behaving. However, that private information is shared with accountants, with attorneys, with spouses, et cetera. Not a secret.
Right. Well, like medical information.
Private.
Medical
Correct.
information is not a secret. Everyone has a medical condition, but it's private, and that's why there are HIPAA laws to protect the patient's privacy. And you share this information with the people that you want to share it with.
We'll try not to get political and talk about HIPAA. No, I'm kidding.
I'm the most apolitical guy in the world, Ellie. You couldn't even get me political.
I'm the second.
If you tried, but I don't want to challenge you.
I'm the second most. And secrecy, on the other hand, is something that we keep from other people, so it promotes disconnection. It's in the furtherance of disconnection. This has to be disconnected from that person, whereas something private is to be shared with that person.
Right, and when you share something private with somebody, that creates a bond.
Correct.
And it doesn't.
And sometimes the sharing is just oneself. It's not something I share with oneself. One thing I noticed, just to add to that point, is in both these emails, even though they kept it private, even though they kept their name hidden, there was an intensity to the email, meaning it was clear that it was difficult in some way for them to write. And why do I think it was difficult is because they were sharing some of these things with themselves for the first time. To clearly write it in this way and to identify it.
I'm sure of it. That it was not, you weren't just the first person they told. It was probably the first time they saw those words in writing.
About themselves, yeah.
That's
the way I felt. Yeah. So I interrupted you.
So that's called keeping a secret from yourself.
Correct.
Which causes dissonance internally. There are parts of myself that I can't recognize. Parts of myself that I can't listen to. And even though it's clamoring to be heard, and I'm just sort of stuffing it down and saying, don't you dare speak up. I don't want to hear from you.
Right. So what's coming up for me as you're speaking is that there's certain messages that definitely seemed to. Let's talk about the first secret. I don't want to go to addiction because that has its own. Let's say the first secret, right? The secret that I was sexually abused. That was a secret that I carried from when I was 8 years old until roughly 23. It was the first time I walked into a therapist's office. I was dealing with issues in my business, and a friend recommended I speak to this therapist. I walked in. When I came to his office, within 10 or 15 minutes, he says, Ali, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, were you sexually abused? And he was the first person I told. He was also the first person I asked. Who asked?
The first person. I've heard you say that before.
Yeah.
The first person you told was the first person who actually asked.
Right. And the reason I say that also is because when I was 13 or 14, I got kicked out of school for getting into a fight with another student, a physical fight. And I guess something about the interaction or the way I explained what happened made my teacher a little bit nervous. And he, in addition to kicking me out of school, also wanted me to go to a therapist. And I went to this therapist every week for 6 months, maybe.
Yeah.
And the therapist didn't ask. And I'm kind of surprised, but I guess it was also a different time, right? We're talking probably 1998, 1999. I don't think a lot of people had the idea that these things didn't exist in a Jewish community. So what's even to ask? I'm going to ask a from community, a kid from Crown Heights, whether he's sexually abused. Certainly these things don't exist here. So, and that actually brings me back well to my point, is there seem to be certain things or certain messages that I received as a child that supported me keeping it a secret. Maybe I'm imagining it, but it supported me keeping it a secret in some way. Maybe it was the fact that the word sex wasn't okay to say. So if I can't say sex, I'm never going to say the full sentence or the full term, sex abuse. But there was something there was some messaging that I felt I got that delivered the message that this secret is one worth keeping. And maybe I guess that's the point of, I don't know if I have a question there, but do you agree with me on that? Do you see that? And maybe that's why we're doing this event this evening, I guess.
What do I agree with? What? Reformulate
that the message that existed, right? I mean, I'm referring to something specific, right? I grew up in Crown Heights. I grew up in a community, in the Chabad community. And I felt like I got this message home, the community, the larger community. Maybe it was the United States of America. I know, for example, for men, it's not as if I was unique in that regard. The average male who's sexually abused doesn't talk about it till their 40s. But it certainly seemed like I got a lot of messaging that supported me keeping it a secret. I guess some was cultural, right? The wider, maybe New York specifically, maybe America specifically, and some was definitely religious as well. That seems to say, hey, keep this a secret. It's worth keeping it a secret.
I think there are multiple factors and they're all true, and they were all part of your experience, and they continue to be part of many people's experiences. There are multiple factors causing people to experience the shame of a secret and a feeling of being compelled to keep that secret. Yeah. But so, you want to talk specifically about the religious community?
Not necessarily, no, more than messaging, but maybe we can add to that.
Because I think I would like to go there.
Okay, so go ahead.
Okay.
You have the longer beard.
Okay. So I think this is a very important issue for the religious community, the Jewish religious community, to examine. Obviously, modesty, what we call modesty, is a very important value. And the sanctity of human sexuality is a very fundamental concept in Judaism. And we want to protect that. There's no question. To me, there is no question that that's a good thing. And it's something worth protecting. At the same time, if people don't know how to do it well, it can end up causing some unforeseen and undesired consequences, such as what you're describing as being part of your experience.
Well, we're definitely in agreement on the part of keeping sexuality sacred, right? That's a value that's important. And I think that, I mean, certainly it's a value within the religious community, and it's clear how a value such as that could very quickly turn into poor messaging and shameful messaging around certain topics. But it's a value that I believe, I think is important. I think it's consistent with a lot of not only religious ideals, I believe, but also just seeing the recovery process from addiction, and how part of that was learning to respect sexuality and the role it has, and not to denigrate it. Like, it's not meaningless, like, okay, just watch porn and it makes no difference, but also not to relegate it to the secret. It's more of a holy, sacred idea. And I think that's certainly what I found to be the healthiest approach for maintaining some sobriety in my life, some periods of time away from pornography and other such addictions.
So let me describe something to you that I see as being a vicious cycle. And it's certainly not unique to religious people, but I think definitely being religious can exacerbate it. And at the end of the day, that's what I'm interested in. I mean, I'm interested in not just religion, but in Judaism. And so that's where I want to focus. So I want to describe to you a vicious cycle. And the place where I learned about this, or where I first saw it described very clearly as a formula, is in a book called Tanya, specifically in chapter 26 of Tanya. He describes this cycle very, very clearly. He says that the negative force whose job it is to it causes resistance, let's call it that. Sometimes the most strategic thing it can do, if it's doing its job well, the most strategic thing that it can do is bring on feelings of inadequacy, spiritual, specifically religious and spiritual inadequacy. And that causes pain. And the person naturally will feel discomfort. They don't want to be in pain. So they will look for relief, distraction. And being that they have a low opinion of themselves at the moment, they're not going to be that picky about the distraction. They're not holding themselves to a very high standard right now, after all.
Right.
Just think about what I'm feeling shame about right now. And then they'll indulge, and the distraction, the indulgence, will provide some measure of relief. And then it's immediately followed, or if not immediately, definitely inevitably followed by a period of even greater self-loathing, which is greater pain, which requires greater distraction, which then brings on a greater indulgence, which brings on greater self-loathing, and lather, rinse, repeat, and it just keeps going.
The cycle it's referring to in Tanya is not a specific area, right? We can say it with food, we can say it with sex, we can say it with
right. He
treating people
doesn't say
unfairly.
specifically that would be of a sexual nature. Doesn't say specifically, no. But elsewhere in the holy books, it's very clear that sexuality is the area where self-consciousness is most pronounced. I mean, we see that from the first story of sin, the story of Adam and Eve, where immediately when they ate from the tree of knowledge and they gained self-awareness or self-consciousness,
it's a sexual organs.
The first symptom of self-awareness was sexual shame. So we know that shame.
And it's sexual shame because they wanted to cover their sexual organs.
They made they made clothing because previously they were innocent like babies. There was nothing shameful to them. The Shalah says that before the sin of the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve would look at their reproductive organs the same way you would look at the arm that you wrapped tefillin on. Right. I mean, there was no shame whatsoever. It was just a body.
Like an animal, like we'd see an animal in the wild, the same thing. There's no.
But not just an animal, because Adam and Eve were humans, and they were deep humans, and they were spiritual humans. They just didn't have that component of self-consciousness ingrained in their psyche yet. So it was a certain innocence. It wasn't coming from being like a low-level creature. They were geniuses, but they didn't have that level of self-awareness. So sexuality and self-consciousness and shame are all very intertwined in the story of humanity. And just going back to what I was saying, if there's anything that can bring a person to a low level spiritually, it's self-awareness, crippling self-consciousness. So what I wanted to sort of bring up is this vicious cycle, and talk about the fact that, ironically, people who, I have to be so careful how I say this, because it is certainly a case of not wanting to throw out the baby with the bathwater. As we were saying 5 minutes ago, how there's something very precious about the Jewish view of sexuality that deserves to be preserved. And we don't want to lose that, God forbid. But there's definitely a component of, and I want to just make it clear, I do not think this is inherent in the Torah's view of it, but I do think it is very common in the imperfect human implementation of it through parents and educators and adolescents figuring out their own sexual identity. At any rate, what I'm describing is the fact that a person with good intentions will actually undermine their own ability to gain some level of sanctity in this area, and it's tragic. It's tragic to see somebody who hates it, they despise it, they don't want this as part of their lives, and that itself is a big part, if not the major part of what's causing it to continue to be this bedevilment in their life.
Right. So when you're saying, that's been my experience, certainly with pornography, and I wonder how much. I think there's a study out of Harvard. Somebody, I didn't read it, but someone said to me that there definitely was a correlation between heavy religious messaging, and actually I would put heavy Christian messaging as way more toxic in this area than heavy Jewish messaging, because the Christian view of a sexuality, meaning there at its core is, the priest doesn't get married. It's a base desire almost that doesn't need to be fulfilled by the purest amongst us. Whereas the Jewish messaging, there's, from what I understand, is a very different message. One of, this is sacred, but that can get a little bit distorted. So anyway, in this study from Harvard,
to use your terminology from earlier, the Jewish message is it's private. Therefore, you, by sharing it, you are creating intimacy. As opposed to, it's a shameful secret that nobody knows, that I'm the only one who has these desires, and I have to make sure that no one should ever find out.
Correct. So what the study said was that there seems to be a link between that type of religious messaging or religious upbringing and addiction to pornography. Not in the sense that someone can't get addicted to pornography otherwise, but in the sense that that's part of the cycle that you're talking about, right? Someone acts out on it, for example. We're using this, the classic example, but of course it extends way beyond this. I know people who have described addiction to food in exactly the same way, all of the same dynamics. But like you said, there's something about sex that is uniquely intertwined with shame. So we'll use that as the example, but it's not the only example. And then after acting out on a certain, whatever it is that I'm trying to stay away from, after going there, that feeling of shame brings me right back to that same place. So interrupting that in some way, as you were saying with that cycle, interrupting that in some way is probably the most important thing one can do to relieve themselves of a lot of the power that the addiction has. Right, here I am doing something. The drive doesn't necessarily come from a shameful drive. It's a drive, was there, but now there's this messaging that I bought into, cultural, religious, all wrapped together, maybe some familial.
And to blame it on the tree of knowledge. I'm saying,
right, there's sexual shame, right?
Even without culture, even without anybody giving you faulty messaging, there's a certain existential issue that is universal to the human condition, which comes from the tree of knowledge.
Correct. Correct.
It's part of being human.
Correct. What we're trying to do, I guess, with this is, can we offer a message? And if I can dissect what you said earlier, it almost seems like there's two choices with sex. either it's a secret that no one can talk about it, or it's strewn about haphazardly and everything goes. And maybe there's the other message, which is probably the healthiest for certainly healthiest for mankind, but certainly the healthiest when someone is dealing with shameful secrets or addiction, etc., is, can I view this as something sacred to be protected and shared with someone private? And if something happens that I don't want to happen, okay, so that's human nature and we deal with it, but we don't allow ourselves to enter that cycle of shame that you spoke about in chapter 26 of Time.
Right, exactly. And I just want to speak to something that you mentioned very much in passing, and maybe ask you to amplify upon it. Obviously, we're not oblivious to the fact that there are many people, and there are movements who will specifically take the approach that you mentioned in passing, where the way they interrupt the shame cycle is just to tell you, hey, whatever you want to do is fine. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
Right.
And I'm not saying that. I don't think you're saying that, but I think it's important to address that approach because, you have both extremes. That everything is shameful and nothing is shameful.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So I think before we talk about the middle path, I think we should speak a little bit about the extremes.
I can talk even in my own experience with healing from addiction to pornography, which I see are some of the questions as well as a possible be released, and how that dovetails nicely with this. So first, I did have that incredible shame around it, and my instinct was to throw it all away. Like, okay, it's fine. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Everything is fine. Everyone does it. You look at the statistics. So where did the shame was still playing a role. It's very interesting. The shame wasn't that I was doing it. When my therapist brought it up, yeah, I watch pornography. Everyone watches porn. Oh, but look at this. Look at the data, right? It's the most watched, right? Does anyone not shop on Amazon? Well, more people shop on Amazon, right? There's more visitors to pornography. So yes, I had this saying, what I wasn't comfortable sharing, what was a shameful secret that I was dependent on it, that I couldn't stop. Meaning in that process of saying everything goes, then it owned me in some way. Mm-hmm. So then I went to the other extreme and I have to shut this down. And I get into recovery, and this became something that's, I can't think a thought. I can't go there. I have to do everything to prevent, I put it in, like I went somewhat to the other extreme. And I wouldn't say it was so long ago. A few years ago, it dawned on me that sex in its natural form, sexuality in its natural form, wants to be expressed in its purest form, in its original form, wants to be expressed with intimacy. And somewhere that gets interrupted. It wouldn't be very surprising in my case if it got interrupted in the way I was introduced to sexuality. It was anything but intimate. It was forced, it was a secret, it was all of those things. So then sex and intimacy became two separate things, two separate tracks. And many people who are addicted to pornography will tell you that who they are intimate with, they have difficulty having sex with, and who they have sex with, they have difficulty having intimacy with. So it almost becomes two parallel tracks that run. So how would that express itself? By specifically, right, wanting a why is pornography almost more attractive than an actual person? Because there's no intimacy, it's a screen. There's zero intimacy here. So it's sexuality. And these same people with their own spouses, who there may be full attraction and everything else, but there's intimacy, there's a closeness. It's very difficult for them to engage in sexuality. I think some people call it, if you heard of the Madonna complex?
There's the various descriptions. Yeah.
That it's either they view a man, either views a woman as the mother or a sex object, right? So this idea.
And I think that, by the way, I wasn't going to, this wasn't on the agenda for tonight, but getting married doesn't automatically cure people of their issues. So there are plenty of people who are married and have these issues, and their spouses are absolutely beside themselves. And I don't want to, I think that that's worthy of a whole podcast unto itself, but I think it's important to note what you're saying is that when this toxic shame reaches this particular level of disorder, there's such a complete separation between sexuality and intimacy that
I almost see the two as two sides of the same coin, like going to that extreme of either it's got to be like in the closet tucked away, or it's got to be like anything goes. They're two sides of the same coin.
Right. The extreme secrecy and the extreme licentiousness, openness, anything goes are two sides of the same coin. And neither of those sides have anything to do with intimacy and bonding and love.
Both of those brought me shame in different ways. That's what I'm bringing up. One was the shame of the secret, right? That I'm engaging in this, and this is something that should be non-existent, right? As a teenager or yeshiva, I'm given all this messaging around how these are the biggest sins in the world. Then I say, okay, I can't maintain this, so I go to the other extreme. Now my shame is that it's controlling me, that I'm dependent on it, that once I go there, I can't stop thinking about it. And it's not that I'm doing it, it's that I can't stop doing it. And then I'm losing confidence in myself because I tell myself I want to stop, and 3 or 4 days later, I'm right back there. Sometimes 3 or 4 hours later, I'm right back there. So the shame it's getting me from one way or another, it's getting me. And then eventually trying to bring a place where, okay, can these two things be in harmony? Can sexuality and intimacy be in harmony? Where it's like, oh, it's a beautiful, sacred idea or thing, only to be shared with my significant other in an intimate manner, right? And then I think this is the middle ground in more ways than one that we're talking about, because that's some of the criticism we can get for doing something like this, which I'm sure is also the reason why it's important. Why is, maybe not so much me, but why is Rabbi Tao talking on a podcast about sexuality, around shame, around secrets? Okay, if it needs to happen one-on-one, have these conversations one-on-one. Why do we have to talk about these things? I think that's the obvious question.
And the shocking answer is because it is an absolute plague. I don't want to frighten anybody, and anyone who's not exposed to what I'm exposed to, I'm happy for you. But the degree to which people are struggling with these issues, and you can blame it on internet, I'm not interested. Honestly, to me, that's not even important right now. The fact is, the fact of the matter is, the degree to which people are struggling with this issue and the degree to which it is causing them disorders in their intimate lives, marital problems, which then become parenting problems, and children growing up without the support and the love and the stability that they need. It is an absolute crisis. It is an absolute crisis. And that's why we're talking about it publicly, among other reasons as well.
Right.
Because I also believe that it is life-saving. And there are plenty of people who are so ashamed, they're not going to reach out to anyone. So we're hoping that somebody will come across this video. And I have no doubt, Ellie, that right now somebody's either watching on Zoom or they'll watch later on YouTube, and they're sitting there full of absolute self-loathing, hating themselves, feeling so alone, so isolated, so separate from everyone in their life and separate from their own maker. And if they can just see us talking and feel that there's a place for them in this world, and there's redemption, and there's a future, and there's hope, and there's a life, then I consider pikuach nefesh to put this, it's a life-saving measure to put out this discussion on a public forum.
Can I challenge it just a little bit?
Yeah, be my guest.
Would you not if it wasn't a life-saving measure, if it wasn't that extreme, but it was something important, is there some validity in demonstrating handling the topic of sexuality with a measure of for both sides, right? We spoke about the two extremes, but handling the topic with some measure of discretion and class, for lack of a better word.
I hope that we are dealing with it right now with this.
No, meaning independent of the emergency. Independent of the emergency, is it just to have the conversation? Meaning, why am I saying this? Because part of how we got to this emergency, I know some people will like to blame it on the internet, but it's not only the internet. The part of how we got to this emergency is by there being heavy messaging, amongst other things, right? You spoke about this is human nature, starting from the first person, first couple, but part of it is this messaging where sexuality is one or the other, right? It seems to be the only two messages one hears. So is there value independent of
I hear what you're saying.
Extreme situation? Is there value just in demonstrating a way of talking about these subjects? And hopefully we're doing it with some discretion and some class, some attending to it as something sacred, but not as something that needs to be kept secret.
Mm-hmm. I hear what you're saying. In other words, there's so much content available out there that will tell you there are no limits, everything goes, there's no such thing as shame, just get over it. There's plenty of that messaging.
Correct.
And there's also plenty of messaging that'll tell you that this is something shameful and to be kept secret. But where is a sane voice to be found that will offer a way, a manageable and wholesome way forward in this area? You're saying it's a rarity to be able to hear people talking in this way. So maybe there's value just in putting out this conversation with this tone.
Correct. And the fact that there's an emergency, right? As you say, there are many, many, many people of all shapes and colors and sizes who struggle in this area, or who know someone who struggles in this area. And, we speak about shame. I've had women email me or message me, sharing with me the shame they have that their husband struggles in this area.
That's what I was talking about.
And who can they talk to about it?
I was touching upon that earlier. We kind of drifted away from it.
Right. I want to focus strictly on shame, on the shame
that
they felt.
Because, Ellie, I want to tell you something. I don't know who's watching this, but I can tell you something funny. It's not funny. It's tragic. It's heartbreaking. The whole subject is tragic and heartbreaking. But I can tell you something peculiar about people who call me about these issues. I don't know about your experience, but my experience is that if somebody will call me about somebody who is probably what we would call a sex addict, 80% of those calls are from the spouse.
Right. Is that my experience?
I mean,
Not as many.
That's
Right.
my experience. 80% of those calls for help are not from the identified addict, but rather from the spouse.
Right.
Who's facing feelings of rage, of betrayal, of isolation, of loneliness, of inadequacy. Like we were saying before, I'm not good enough. And maybe they've even been told by people they've confided in, well, if you do more to keep his attention, to validate him, it always breaks my heart when I hear, again, I don't want it to seem like this is always gender specific, but very often it is a woman who's calling about a husband who's very immersed in these things, and she feels very inadequate. And she's even been told by some people that she's confided in that really ultimately it's her, that if she were more this or more that, he wouldn't be an addict, which to me is
Right.
patently ridiculous. But I think if if the demographic who watches this video is similar to the demographic of people who reach out to me, what I'm saying is, I bet you it's possible there's a lot of spouses watching this video right now. Possible. And I think, although I hadn't planned on it, but it came up a little while ago, I think it's worthy to speak about, because I there's such a, you talk about shame, the internalized shame, the intimate wound of being betrayed in that way, and that if I were only this, or if I were only that, I wouldn't be worthy of rejection. My spouse wouldn't.
I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a personal story. So one of the things that when I was steeped in addiction, it was a video I came across. I haven't seen it in years, but I'll never forget it. It was a video I came across on YouTube where I think it was titled something like "Why I Stopped Being Filmed in Porn Videos" or something like that. Right? And a woman was explaining why she left the industry, and she said that she was in the industry for years. She was in a committed relationship, and she one day walked in on her boyfriend viewing pornography. And she said until that moment, she thought, I'm more attractive than the other woman. That's why other people watch me. And here you have, right? And here you have one person who I'm choosing to actually be with me in a real way, not for the money. I really love him. And she says, and I walk in, I see him watching pornography. She said it was at that moment that I realized that there's something much deeper going on here, and that many people are using the pornography, and this is some of what I'm sharing earlier, specifically as a way to avoid any intimacy. So it has nothing to do with attraction or not attraction. It has to do with avoiding what we talked about earlier.
Ellie,
the natural way
we've discussed this before. You and I have discussed this topic many times. I've never heard that from you before. That is incredibly powerful.
When I saw this, very powerful for me. When I saw this was right around the time that I was coming to terms with my own addiction and starting to talk to a therapist about it. And I saw this film or this interview, and I've never gone to look for it again because I don't have a good, healthy way of looking for it and not bumping into the wrong
It's
thing.
not a kind of thing you want to Google for.
How do I search? So I've never gone to look for it again. I never gone to look for it again.
And nobody out there needs to Google it. You heard the bottom line. Ellie Nash told you the takeaway. You don't need to look for it.
Correct. So the that message to me, I remember hitting me hard and saying like, wow, there's something else going on here. It's not just a sexual drive. There's something else that this is being used for. And it allowed me to peel much deeper. And maybe I'm tempted to go into some of that subject because we're talking heavily about pornography, and someone asked the question, how can I get free from it, or how can one get free from it? I think it's useful to maybe talk about it, unless you want to, before we go in there, because that's a whole conversation in its own right. Do you want to share some other thoughts on what we're talking about here around the spouse?
I want to continue this. Again, this is not where I thought we were going to go, but I think it's really, really important.
I don't think our conversations ever go where we think it's.
No, they never do. Mendel Futterfass said there are two Verbrengens: the Verbrengen you plan and the Verbrengen that actually happens.
And then there's a third, and the Verbrengen people say happen.
So one point I think needs to be repeated is that somebody in a relationship with somebody else who's struggling in these areas, as hard as this is to accept, and maybe it's no consolation, but at least cognitively you may be able to wrap your mind around this. This is the very opposite of intimacy. And it doesn't make it feel like less of a rejection or less of a betrayal, but I think for quote unquote normal people, or people who are experiencing their sexuality in a normal way, it's impossible not to equate the two. And I think it needs to be understood that, your example was such a powerful example of the fact that it's not about you aren't desirable enough. It's not about that you haven't done something or something you should have done more or less. Or sometimes they think if I would have been tougher and meaner and made more ultimatums, or if I would have been sweeter and more more attractive, or if I would have done this or would have done that. And at the end of the day, what the person's looking for is not something that you would want as another human being to be the source of. What they're looking for is, to use a cliche term, the avoidance of intimacy. The avoidance of intimacy. And I think for someone who's in a relationship with someone who's struggling in these areas, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. It's like, well, why does that person want intimacy elsewhere? And the answer is no, it's not that they're looking for intimacy elsewhere. They're looking for anything but intimacy, which is why they can't bond properly with their spouse.
It's what my sponsor tells me all the time. He reminds me over and over. He says sexual addiction is an intimacy disorder.
Intimacy disorder.
An intimacy disorder. All the time. He repeats this over and over. And what you're saying matches well with his message.
So that's one thing. I think another thing that that emerges from this insight or from this realization is, people are asking, I see in the Q&A, how do you avoid it? How do you get away from it? And there's a big unspoken part of this, which is not about how do you get away from this bad thing. Okay, fine. So you'll get away from it. But let's say even you're free from this negative distraction in your life. How do you become open and available to the real intimacy that a human being was designed by God to seek out? So there's sumerav asay toiv, go away from bad and do good. So even let's say you were able to get away from the pornography, are you able to experience intimacy with a human being? And that's a whole other discussion that people aren't really prepared to have. They want to talk about this demon. Okay, we could talk about that, but I don't think you can have a productive discussion about that in a vacuum, devoid of the discussion of, well, what's the real thing that this is substituting? What's the real thing that this is blocking off and getting in the way of?
I often find myself sharing this idea with people who are in recovery from addiction, have already begun to learn to live a life free of pornography. And someone asked a question, the way they worded it kind of, is pornography something I can ever get out of, right? So like the way they worded it, there was a time in my life when I watched pornography every day. Then there was a time in my life where I watched pornography every couple of weeks and every week. And I'm sorry, then every month, then every few months. And then it got longer, the times between got longer and longer and longer, right? Till it became years. But it's not about, if I watch tomorrow, that suddenly, okay, everything is, the 5 or so years that I didn't watch, like that's nothing, that's meaningless. I didn't get out of pornography. So when we think about it in those ways, it's one reason in addiction, they say one day at a time, it becomes this feat that's very difficult to accomplish. No one's saying like you're never going to drink wine again in your whole life. If any addict thinks like that, there's no way. There's no way, because you start thinking of the most stressful moments of your life, and this was your companion, this was your friend, this was like the wine, the alcohol was something that got this person through. So now you're trying to get to a place where you're not having such intense down, so someone doesn't have to go there, but not thinking in terms of lifetimes or decades. It's one day at a time. Today my intention is to stay away from pornography, and tomorrow I'll wake up and I'll do the same thing all over again. And if God forbid I slip one day, that's that day, and the next day I wake up with the same intention as the prior day. I think going in with that mindset is one that can get people in there. But before I went to that, I was talking about the fact that we're speaking about shame, we're speaking about secrets, but I don't want to pretend that, okay, so someone is in this situation, they have this secret for a long time, this person who emailed me, and suddenly he shares it with me, we got on the call, the shame is gone 20%. Then he shares his first name with me, now it's at 40%, he shares his full name and his address, and now it's at 100%, the secret's gone. Not exactly. Not exactly. And I can say not for my case. There was a toxic level of shame that was destroying me when I wasn't talking about it. And there was nothing I can do to make it better. And once I started talking about it, now there was the potential to start healing it, but it didn't go away in one day just because we start talking about it. And I did want to, just in case we're over focusing on secrets and someone here is coming feeling that shame, and they're saying, but I don't have that secret anymore. I've already spoken. Why do I still feel the shame? It takes longer than just sharing the secret. The secret makes it impossible to. Have you heard the saying? I don't know where it comes from, Rabbi Shais. You can't save your tuchus and your face on the same day. I think you're on mute. I think you're on mute. Do I have to unmute?
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you heard that saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what it means, for those who haven't heard it before, is that, and the way you're using it especially, is to remain healthy. The process of maintaining good spiritual health is going to require continual embracing of humility. And as soon as the pride gets in the way, and the sense of terminal uniqueness, and somehow I'm different, or my story is different, then things start to unravel. I mean, I said this earlier, but I'm going to say it again in a little bit different terms. I was speaking before about the guilt cycle, where a person feels self-loathing and then they indulge in pleasure in order to cover up, to distract themselves from that pain. Sometimes the pain is not even guilt. Sometimes the pain is just the pain of being in existence separate from God.
Which pain specifically?
The pain that we're seeking to numb.
Right.
Meaning it's unavoidable. It's an existential fact that we are created beings, and as created beings, we are the creation, not the creator. And hold on though, but God is all oneness. And if he's oneness, how can there be a me and a him? And that puts us in a very unusual predicament. And it feels funny to be a something. We should be at one with the everything. And that itself can be the discomfort that we're seeking to numb. And that's why often we talk about in recovery that the ultimate solution is a vital spiritual experience and a relationship with a higher power. Because really, what is the addiction? An attempt to numb. It's the pain of separation from God. So if a person has religious-based shame, obviously that's an even more acute, exacerbated feeling of separation from God. But what I'm saying is, even when a person is a tzaddik, even when he's holy and he's doing good things, there still can be a sense of existential pain that could drive someone to self-medicate through numbing behaviors. And that's where constant humility and surrender play a role. Because as soon as that self-consciousness creeps back in, that sense of separation, that sense of ego, it can scream out for numbing. It's enough of an interruption. It's enough of an annoying feeling that will scream out to be numbed. And if it becomes aggravating enough, who knows what a person will do to distract themselves from it.
And then once they do, if they're entering that cycle that you spoke about earlier,
and from there it's off to the races.
themselves.
Yeah, because then my selfhood becomes even more shameful. Yeah.
So what is the practical recommendation for someone struggling with debilitating shame? I think we kind of spoke about the first part, which maybe if I can just say it succinctly, is find someone safe to share the secret with. Doesn't mean to get from the rooftop and blare it, right? I didn't start by talking about my porn addiction on the TED stage. I started in a therapist's office who was a therapist I knew for 5 years, and there was certain safety, and this was something risky for me that I was talking about it. And once I got to the point that I was able to release some of that shame with him, then it became so forth, right? But that seems to be a good first step for someone who's struggling with shame.
Yeah.
What's beyond that?
Well, we've been kind of alluding to it, but we haven't said it clearly. We have to adopt a healthy definition of human sexuality and of humanity. We have to adopt a healthy working definition.
So we'll say humanity because this is more broad than sexuality, for sure.
Sexuality is the chief symptom of self-awareness, like I was talking
Right.
about before, the story of Adam and Eve. But it's really about self-awareness. It's about self-consciousness. It's about what am I as an existence. It's deep stuff. It's deep stuff, and it's universal. It's ubiquitous. It's the human condition.
But that's something interesting you're saying. You're saying the human condition is shame.
Yes.
So it almost becomes, if the human condition is shame,
Well, Ellie, could I ask you a question?
Does
the chair have self-consciousness? No, because it has no consciousness.
Right,
So that's human.
Right,
that's the human condition.
The human condition is shame. The fear. What is shame? The fear of not being worthy of connection.
Right.
What is the area we can most connect on?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's the irony.
Our shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. So the thing that really you and I could bond most, we could really confide in each other and really become bonded and trusting each other and really validating each other, is the fact that we both will never tell each other that.
Right. So in some way, right, it's been, I guess in my life, it's been somewhat of my story, right? That I have this secret. The secret is, let's talk about we're talking about pornography, the sexual shame. So I have this secret. I begin to talk to a therapist. The first recommendation from my therapist is, let me introduce you to another one of my clients who has the same problem. Over lunch with him, we connect, right? So there's a connection that's formed because of the fact that I have this problem. He introduces me to a group, a 12-step group, and now I'm going to that 12-step group, and some of my best friends and closest relationships are formed over there. And then beyond that, I begin to speak about this, share about this, and it becomes an additional source of connection that I have with many people, where someone who I don't know, a stranger, is listening to Shais and I speak, and decides that he's going to make an email address to talk with me, and that becomes a connection. I wouldn't recognize him if I passed him on the street, but we had very intimate conversations together. The irony.
Yeah.
The irony. So that's the solution. That's the solution. The solution is in the shame.
Well, the problem is always the solution. Any good answer, any authentic answer is a repurposing of the original question. That's how Jewish learning works. That's why the bigger the question, the better the answer.
Explain.
If I'll speak a little bit rabbinic for a second. There's a Jerusalem Talmud and a Babylonian Talmud. And if there's ever a dispute between them, meaning they come to different conclusions about the law, the accepted practice for the millennia has been that we rule according to the Babylonian Talmud.
Because they argue more?
Well, do they argue more? Yes.
No, is it because they argue more that's the accepted?
Because the Babylonian Talmud style is much more convoluted, with a lot more dialectic, point, counterpoint, refutation,
right.
Counter refutation. So therefore, its conclusions are seen as more decisive.
And to bring that back to here, what we're talking about.
So anytime you have a problem, the real resolution of the problem is not to get rid of the problem, bury the problem, or figure out some smart way how it's, don't worry, you can ignore it. No, it's to identify how the bigger the problem, the bigger the potential there is to get some productivity out of it. And that the whole...
Right, so he's saying over here, the fact that there's this problem that they're wrestling with in the Babylonian Talmud is exactly what gives it the strength that's more forceful and more impactful than the Jerusalem Talmud.
Right. So
I'll bring that to here.
Yeah.
When I'm faced with a challenge, oftentimes I'll say, I got over my porn addiction. I got over. I'm no longer dependent on porn the way I used to be. I can certainly tackle this, whatever this is. Right. So it was the problem that had me feeling intense shame, intense unworthiness, intense inadequacy, and is probably a larger storehold of confidence than anything else in my life.
Yeah, and even deeper than that, I would say that the thing that caused you the most isolation has become the source of meaningful human relationships.
Okay, so I think I'm thinking if I was listening to this, because oftentimes what I like putting out there is what I would have liked to hear when I was in the place of the people that I think I'm speaking to now.
Right.
So
paint the picture, Ellie. Paint the picture. The guy who's sitting here right now watching this, or the man or the woman who's watching this right now, with headphones on, God forbid anyone should know, with their hand ready to, click to some other browser tab that God forbid anyone should see what they're watching, right? Probably even more shameful than the schmutz that God forbid anyone should know. It's like the people who are more embarrassed to walk into a 12-step meeting than into a crack house, right? But
right.
So paint the picture. Describe the feeling right now. The person who is in crisis and who's watching this and who's desperate. Go ahead. Just describe it.
Right. So when I think about where I was, oftentimes when did the demoralization completely set in? Was after I'd made a commitment to, so the cycle would start, right? I do something for whatever reason, some discomfort, some boredom, some success, something goes well. and I'm feeling good and I don't know what to do with these feelings. This brings me back to baseline, whatever it is. Now I'm in the cycle. Okay. I feel bad that I did this. So what I do when I feel bad, I do more of it and on until it kind of reaches a breaking point, and I say, I'm done. I'm never watching this again. Sometimes what I'm done looks like, and it has been in my case, taking a laptop, smashing it, and throwing it down a garbage chute in the building. Okay, I'm done, never watching this again. I'm never bringing a laptop in my house. I'm figuring out something else. Somehow, a week or two later, I'm back. That feeling the first time is so demoralizing. There was a commitment, there was a promise, I'm not going to do it. There was an action. And I like that word demoralization for it because it's so hopeless feeling. It's like, this is never going to end. Could I have had more conviction than this? I'll tell you even a better story. I've shared this on a number of occasions. I got an eye infection once. And when I went to the doctor said that I have something called a corneal ulcer. And he didn't say this, but right away I said, I have a corneal ulcer because I watch too much pornography. And he said it's sometimes resistant to antibiotics. God is punishing me. I need to see you every single day for the next 14 days. Let's make appointments. And the reason is I need to see how it reacts to the antibiotics I give you, because if it doesn't respond well, it could cause blindness. When he said that, I was convinced I am going blind in one eye because I've watched too much pornography. Not maybe, not a theory. In that moment, I felt it to the core of my being. So I walked out of that office, committed to never watch porn again. 2 or 3 days later. I would imagine
you were highly motivated at that moment.
Right. It's not even the word. It was just, there was nothing that was going to, in that moment, there was absolutely nothing that was going to get in the way. So moments like this, right? Leaving that doctor's office or smashing the laptop and throwing it down the garbage chute, I'm done. I'm not even bringing one back into my house. And then a week or two later, going back to that same place, there's a feeling of uselessness, of hopelessness, of inadequacy, of I'm never going, I can't figure anything, and I won't be able to figure anything out. This is something that I said I'm not going to do, and here I am back again in this place. And that's who would I even be on something like this? I'm probably a step before being on something like this, to be honest. Right? If I had a destination, if I had an address, maybe I'm feeling like this. I'm probably not on something like this. Maybe I'm on the recording of something like this.
Ellie, when you talk about that, the diagnosis, and by the way, I'm assuming, this was years ago, so your eyes are okay now.
So yes, 2 or 3 days later, the doctor said it's reacting well. I don't have to see you tomorrow. I can see you in 2-3 days. And I didn't do 14 days like clockwork. We set it up. Let's say I saw him 5 times over the next couple of weeks, and it responded well. And when it responded well, with the corneal also going, so did my conviction. And I was back to porn in a week. And that's the cycle. That's exactly the cycle. It feels so different. You feel like different moments. Like here, I'm committed. I'm never doing it. It's out with the trash. And I'm back to it a week later because I'm in the cycle you spoke about, chapter 26.
Yep. So somebody's out there right now and they've experienced this ultimate letdown, this self-betrayal. And they're feeling disgusted with themselves, feeling hatred.
There's a lot of self-hatred, there's a lot of self-loathing, there's a lot of the inadequacy. It's like I can't do anything. Like I'm just useless. Even if there's an area of my life where I'm seeing something productive, there's like, if only this person knew how incapable I am of just functioning like just a basic person. My word doesn't mean anything. Nothing means anything. Nothing. My commitments mean nothing. I'm just, there's definitely an emptiness and a sense of utter loneliness.
I think this is important for another reason to talk about this from a little bit different angle. And that is, sometimes not too many of my colleagues, because I think most rabbis who deal with people understand what we're talking about, at least on some level. At least on some level, they understand that the shame is part of the problem. But some people don't get it, and they'll ask me, like, aren't you afraid? For instance, people ask me, aren't you afraid you're normalizing this? You're causing people to take it more lightly, and shouldn't you rather, put the fear of God into them, tell them how bad it is? And my response is that they know how bad it is. It's not that they didn't learn in Reishis Chochmah about the Gehenim of Zera Levatala, and all of these things are true. We know they're true. That's not the issue here. The issue is, my question is, do you want results? Do you want results? I'm saying to someone who's asking me or making a religious argument about, are we, God forbid, speaking about these matters in a cavalier way? And what my response is, do you want results? Do you want more of this behavior or less of it? If you're legitimately on the side of Torah, Torah doesn't like these behaviors. We know that. God frowns upon this, okay? We know that this is undesirable. So if you really think that it's undesirable, you should want less of it. What if I were to tell you that talking about this in a way that exacerbates people's religious shame surrounding it causes more of it?
Right.
Causes more of it. So then what do you want? You want to be able to talk about how bad it is, or do you want there to be less of it in the world and in people's lives?
Right. What's interesting is that I'm at a place now where I have much less shame, much less fear, much less fear of punishment or any of these other things. If I got a corneal ulcer today, even if I went back somehow to watching porn on a regular basis, the thought wouldn't cross my mind that this is here as a punishment from God. It's no longer my relationship with God. However, that, like I said, kept me in it. And then the opposite messaging of, it's okay. You did it for certain reasons. Instead of asking, Gabor Mate says, a famous addiction author on addiction, instead of asking why the addiction, ask why the pain. And he has a method called compassion inquiry. It's almost like, instead of asking what's wrong with you, what's wrong with you that you watch porn? Ask what's right with you that you watch porn. What's right? What's right about the porn? Well, what's right about it is that when I'm feeling lonely and depressed and anxious, the porn soothes that. Oh, great. Do you want me to give you a better technique than porn for loneliness and anxiety and everything else? It'll work, and you won't have the shame, and you won't have the negative side effects. And here are some things I can recommend. For example, a meeting, right? A 12-step meeting is a much better and long-term cure for loneliness than is watching porn. So I'm not sitting here anymore with, I'm a terrible person who's going to lose my eyesight if I watch porn. And when I believe that, what did I do? I stopped for a period and I went right back to it. Instead, I'm like, hey, there's this problem that porn was solving for me, and I found a better method. So now it comes up. Okay, so loneliness, I know what to deal with it. Is porn an option? It's certainly an option. It's not a good option anymore. It doesn't have to be this massive monster hanging over my head. And when it was, it didn't work. But I do want to dig in on that, because I wonder if there's a difference between, let's say, someone who's addicted to pornography, who's kind of crossed that threshold, or someone who's not. And this, I'm not 100% sure, but I think I heard this from, I'm sensitive to quote them, but I think it was from Guard Your Eyes that I heard this concept. So Guard Your Eyes is an organization that helps people with pornography, who struggle with pornography. And if I recall what they told me, and maybe they still do this or don't, when someone comes into them, the first thing they want to understand is what are we dealing with there? Are we dealing with someone who struggles with this from time to time, whatever, every so often, a yeshiva bacher who ends up in this place and is looking for a little bit of strength to not go there? Or are we dealing with someone who's in that spiral, in the addiction spiral? And if I recall correctly, the messaging is somewhat different. So the messaging to someone, and I'm not saying this is right, I'm actually asking for your input on it, what you think about this. The messaging to someone who hasn't crossed a certain threshold is a little bit stronger. And saying, do you understand the sins? You understand the spiritual calamity that's being created by you engaging in this behavior? Do you understand the risks you're taking spiritually and physically? And we can talk about some of the physical symptoms of it, right? I think the Gemara says, right, the breath gets bad and like teeth fall out and whatever, right? There's some physical symptoms that are connected to these things also. So they'll start sending some of those messaging and it'll be effective. But for the addict, it's counterproductive. It does exactly the opposite. So the messaging has to be somewhat different. Taylor, does that sound right? I mean, is there room ever for this tough, hard-nosed approach?
Never make categorical statements. That's a rule.
Never say never.
Yeah, never say never. Are there people who respond well to the fire and brimstone? I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. That's not the question. The question is, what if you are such a person who knows the fire and brimstone and you keep on experiencing these terribly demoralizing, shocking, baffling self-betrayals? And it's like, what else do I need? What motivation am I lacking here? What clarity am I lacking? Why am I back here again? So is it that we need to scare you more? Is it that we need to impress upon you the destruction that you are causing even more? Is that what's lacking? Ask yourself.
But you're saying that message has already been sent. And those things exist. People can read those books. It's very clear what it says. If someone has gone through the system of yeshiva, they've heard enough of those that if that hasn't done the job, doubling down on it is not going to do it. If anything, it's going to send you in the opposite direction.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. That do we think that we haven't been articulate enough in describing how bad it is? Maybe there's a Tinnik Shanishba, somebody who was raised completely outside of Judaism, somebody who was raised completely outside of morality, and they have no clue. Okay, so we got to clue them in. We got to tell them how bad it is. But what about the guy who knows how bad it is? And precisely because he knows how bad it is, every fall is accompanied by deep, deep shame and self-hatred, which ultimately brings him back to the escape, the numbing, the distraction of more of the same stuff that he's ashamed of. So rather than asking me, is there a place for more fire and brimstone? Because for that, sure, there's a place for it. How big of a place? How many people? I don't know. That's not my concern.
Right.
Ask me instead, what if you're a person? What if you're watching this now and you know all the fire and brimstone and you're still coming back to these terrible moments of shocking self-betrayal? Do you really honestly believe that you just need more hellfire? You need more fear of God? Or is it perhaps that you need a different approach altogether?
And is the other approach, if someone's listening to this, is okay, I'm going to lie to someone to make them feel a little bit better about the situation?
No, God forbid, we'd never lie to anybody. And if anyone would push me to the wall and say, how bad is this sin? I wouldn't lie to them. It's terrible. You want to know how bad it is? I mean, as far as polluting someone's soul, as far as causing numbness to everything that's good and holy, there's nothing more devastating than these types of sins. It's absolutely a soul killer. But it's precisely because this stuff is so devastating that driving the point home is such an ill-advised idea. Again, let me repeat something I've said. If I really hate this stuff, which supposedly, ostensibly I should, because we know that Hashem hates this stuff. We know that. When Balaam wanted to trip up the Jews, he told Balak, there's a whole story in the book of Numbers. He said, look, if you really want to get the Jews on God's bad side, trip them up with promiscuity, because Elokayim shel Yisrael Seinei Zimahu, the God of the Jews, hates lewdness. He hates it. Okay. So you're going to really push me to the wall and say, how bad is this stuff? The worst of the worst of the worst of the worst. Precisely because this stuff is so bad, I'd like to see less of it in the world. I'd like to see less of it in people's lives. And if merely doubling down, like you're calling it, on the severity of it is actually causing a cycle that's making more of it, then I think we have to be humble enough to stop and back away and say, hold on a second. Is there another approach that's going to be more productive? Like, if you're not making money,
but that approach has to be true. But that approach has to be speaking
of
truth.
Of course it has to be true.
So what is the truth that we're saying? We're just not paying attention to the fire and brimstone, or we're saying, I think that part of the messaging, when I think about it, it's not that I need to be reminded now of how much it messes me up. I don't even think of it in terms of a punishment. Like, it's in and of itself. If I go there, I'm numb, I'm disconnected, I'm not feeling good. The consequences, embedded in the action. There's nothing to. I don't need. I don't need an outside force.
Well, I don't separate those two things, Ellie. I don't separate.
They're one and the same.
Because it doesn't have to be a lightning bolt from the sky. I mean, divine punishment could be just a feeling of loneliness and shame and disconnectedness. So it doesn't have to be a lightning bolt from the sky.
Right. You ate too much and you feel full. There's no, we're going to give a punishment to this guy. He's going to gain 6 pounds.
What I'm saying is everybody knows the negative consequences.
Right. Right.
And in this particular case,
but it's not irredeemable is one because I think that's the separation. That was a distinction for me. There was something about it is that this sin is somehow in a special category,
right,
that can't really be forgiven. It's compared to murder or whatever else, it can't really be forgiven. And as a result, there's no redemption for it. There's nothing to do. That was where I felt.
And therefore I'm doomed.
If I'm doomed anyway, keep going.
So live it up. If I were a thief, I would be redeemable. But this is irredeemable. And that's what I'm telling you. We see from the story of Adam and Eve that their first experience with self-consciousness was sexual shame, and they wanted to make clothing to cover their reproductive organs. Sexuality and self-consciousness are so intertwined. They're so intertwined. So, it's like the uniqueness, quote unquote, of this sin. Where's that coming from? The uniqueness of it. Like, why is this so uniquely irredeemable? So uniquely beyond
it's not irredeemable,
the pale?
But so uniquely severe.
Because, so what?
Not to use the word irredeemable. We don't want to use that word.
No, but the feeling is that it's irredeemable.
Oh, right. The feeling is, yeah.
Yeah. The feeling is, why does this feel so uniquely irredeemable?
Oh, right. Okay. I didn't hear that word, feeling.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I didn't say the word, but that's
right.
The context here. Why does it feel so uniquely irredeemable? Why doesn't it feel like being a thief? Why does it feel different?
The reason I think is that our sexuality is so tied up with our essence. It's like right there.
That's right.
It's like a here.
So my whole sense of self, this is deeper. This isn't just a behavior. This isn't just what I do. This is who I am. This is my identity. I know a lot of people, I'm judging from the Q&A, and it's probably representative of what people are thinking when they're watching this. They want more practical guidance. And here's the thing. Practical guidance, okay, maybe at the end we'll give 30 seconds practical guidance. But if you've spent hundreds of hours trying to figure this thing out, so just spend a couple more hours with me and Ellie listening to another way of thinking about it. You've already spent hundreds of sleepless nights, thousands of sleepless nights trying to figure this thing out. Slow down a second, listen to another way of thinking about it. Think about it like this. Again, if I were a thief, if I were a liar, if I were, dishonest in business, all these things are shameful. They're all, none of these things are things that you would brag about. But there's no question there's a certain unique feeling of shame when it comes to anything that has to do with sexuality.
Right.
Okay. So here's the thing. Self-concept and sexual identity, according to Torah, are completely intertwined. Before Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, they had no self-concept and they had no sexual identity. Those two things came on exactly at the same time, one being a symptom or a manifestation of the other.
So what does it mean, no sexual identity? Would they not have children?
Of course, that's what, to be celibate is not to have no sexual identity. It's to be in flight from your sexual identity. No, to have children and to reproduce and to be married. And yet it's nothing you think about so much. It's like,
right.
It's like breathing. There's nothing, are there people who secretly go in the corner and take sips of breath? They're breathing. Nobody has shame about the fact that they breathe. Although when somebody feels really deep shame, they might hate themselves for even breathing the air of this planet, right? If you hate yourself enough, I don't even deserve to breathe the same air as normal human beings. Okay. But again, that comes from the sense of self-consciousness. That comes from the sense of hyper awareness of one's ego. And generally, people don't automatically by default have shame about the fact that they breathe. Although they do have by default automatically shame about their sexuality. Why? Because that's something that we equate, not just we equate it, it is interlinked with self-awareness. That's why, and not to get into a whole other discussion, but you ask, what's worse, to get beaten up or to be sexually abused?
I was going to go there actually, so I'm glad you
okay did. So let's do it, because
I've made this point before, and actually for myself, it's one of the things that's given me appreciation for the sacredness and unique connection to our identity that our sexuality holds. Because when I heard people's stories, for a while I was doing a lot of work and speaking on child sex abuse. And oftentimes I'd hear people say something like, I had a pretty good childhood. I wasn't sexually abused. I was never sexually abused. So everything was okay. Or someone would say, I was sexually abused, right? And I was like, what is this? There's some unique pain that sexual abuse has that nothing else has.
Right.
What do you mean?
Right. Like what about growing up in poverty? What about growing up in a war zone? What about growing up with starvation? But being molested is a whole different category.
Or what about, you mentioned being beaten up, and the answer is yes and no. And here's what I came to, and tell me what you think. Is that suppose someone had a good childhood, okay, normal, right? Nothing, attentive parents, loving parents. On one occasion, for whatever reason, okay, their uncle's in the house and beats the kid up. 20 years later, you run into the kid, how's he doing? I think he'll be doing okay. as long as there's no physical, like a broken arm or something that hasn't recovered, there's this moment in childhood that's not pleasant, possibly traumatic, but by and large, you're going to see a healthy, well-adjusted person. They've had a good childhood and they had this one occasion of getting beaten up. Whereas in my experience, meeting people, it wasn't my experience, I was sexually abused tens of times. So that's not my experience. But in speaking to people who had wonderful lives, they were good. And then one day jogging, for example, a woman is raped. Other than that, they had a charmed life. But suddenly it's not the same if someone was beaten up once or if someone was raped once. There's a completely different person that you'll see sitting in front of the person. So what I came to is that the effect is the same. Sustained psychological, emotional, physical abuse will get someone to pretty much the same place as sexual abuse. But there's something about sexual abuse that felt to me like it only takes one time. Literally only takes one time, and the person can be scarred in a way that creates an unrecognizable person. There is no dilution of it, right? They say in certain things, if a parent, I had a conversation a few weeks ago with what's his name? Lazar Bloom, his name was, a relationship therapist. He said that children, if you get it right a third of the time, something like that, I think it was 3 out of 10 times you're present, you're attentive to the child, it's usually enough. They'll be okay. You'll have someone who's well adjusted. A parent doesn't have to be perfect for a child to be well adjusted. But in the arena of sexuality, a parent has to be perfect, right? If a parent, God forbid, sexually abused a child one time, right. Yeah, 3 in 10, you're not even saying 9 in 10, you're not even saying that. There's no dilution of that experience, where other experiences, and from what I've seen, can be diluted. And I think that's like, it touches to the essence, right? The essence can't be diluted. And when the essence is kind of affected, diluted. I do want to clarify that it's obviously not the essence, because it's possible to heal from it. But there's definitely a quality to it before it's healed. That's like the seed has been scratched, not the branch. The seed has been scratched.
I agree. I couldn't agree more that these things have a different way of affecting us. And if ever there were a window to the mystical, if ever there were a way to glimpse some of the things that Kabbalah and Chassidus say about our souls and our humanity, I think this is a pretty compelling insight. Even someone who's not spiritually inclined, I think, would have to be at least give pause to consider why sexuality has such a different place in our experience, both of trauma and of bonding.
I've made that point during speeches when I was probably as disconnected as my experience with Judaism hasn't been a straight line in either direction, right? There's been ups and downs. But at a period that I was most disconnected or felt most disconnected or was acting most disconnected, I made that point that I do not think it would be possible to understand the devastating nature of sexual abuse without looking at the spiritual dimension and the spiritual components that are at play. It just doesn't make sense. There's no logical explanation to me that you can offer for why someone who's sexually abused once will show physical trauma that you will not see from someone who one time, was yelled at by a teacher or something like that. Not that it doesn't have an effect. Of course it has an effect, but it sits almost as an isolated incident that needs to be solved. Right. Not that you see the shell of a human being sitting in front of you oftentimes from one experience. And you're like, wow.
They talk about complex trauma, where there's repeated traumas or micro traumas. And
CPTSD. Yeah.
Right. The cumulative effect of the, millions of paper cuts. But there's something about a breach of our sexuality, which is
there's a pasuk. Someone showed it to me. The Rebbe Rashab has a whole mimer. Chilel brisay b'shleimet. It's like, The pasuk
I mean,
in
it's
Tehillim,
from we just had Yud Tes Kislev.
Right.
So
What's the
in
line?
the Pod of Shalom,
Yeah.
there's in Pod of Shalom we have
Maybe have a
Kapitel
book
Nun
next to it.
Hey.
But there's a line in there, and someone said the Rabbi Shop translates it like that. I forget the exact line, but I'm sure we'll pick it up.
Yeah. So the whole verse is Sholach Yadav Bishleimov Chilel Brisai.
Right. So he connected, which translates like I'll let you translate it to do a better job.
They sent out their hands against your peace. They profaned your covenant or his covenant.
Right. So the way he explained it, Rashab, is sent out his hands b'shleimov against his completion. And what is that? Like he profaned his bris, right? That when our sexuality is touched, it's like touching someone in their shleimus, like in their essence. That's the way it's a sikh of Rabbi Shab. I can share it with you. It was very interesting when I saw it, and it was taught to me. Rabbi Simon Jacobson showed it to me, and he said it can be read and understood as either. It's funny. It's either one of these things we're talking about, which is interesting tonight. Is either a sexual transgression or sexual abuse. He says, like when you read it, it's clear that you can interpret it either way. When that is touched, when the essence of someone is touched, either by themselves or by someone else, then it affects the essence of the being, of the person. He says, and that's why, and he goes on to say that's why a different level of tikkun, of healing, of repair is needed for these types of transgressions, but I'm using transgression both ways, a personal transgression or a transgression against someone in this arena.
When you're equating sexual transgression with sexual abuse, I mean, should it really be such a difficult concept? You're not allowed to punch someone else in the face. You're not allowed to punch yourself in the face. I'm saying according to halakha, according to Torah law, you're not allowed to harm someone else. You're not allowed to harm yourself. So you're not allowed to sexually abuse yourself either. And I'm not saying it to make people feel worse than they already do. What I'm saying is that, yes, it's a form of abuse, meaning it does harm. And where does that harm reach? Like we're saying, it reaches to the essence. And that's part of what makes it so insidious, because it's not just a part of me now that is broken. There's a existential feeling of brokenness. And when you're feeling that existentially broken, obviously you're going to be desperate for some type of soothing, some type of relief, even if it's by indulging in the very thing that's causing the feeling of deep brokenness. And that's the cycle. That's the vicious cycle. And I know maybe, people are sitting out there in TV land and they're like, why are these guys talking for 2 hours about such deep spirituality and identity and self-consciousness and shame? I think you want a list of 5 tips and tricks, like clickbait titles, do this, do that, a little short list of things to do, conquer your porn addiction. I'm going to say it straight up. This isn't a small matter. This is a big matter. It is all consuming. When a person is being when a person is experiencing pain in this area, whether it was inflicted upon them or by themselves or a combination of the two. But when a person is experiencing pain in this area, what part of them hurts? It's not a part, it's all of them. It's all of them. And if something is hurting all of you, then the healing has to involve all of you. And the healing is not going to be compartmentalized. The healing is going to be holistic. The healing is going to be getting down deeper to your essence than you ever thought you ever were going to do. So to those who are asking, well, what's the solution? The solution is the intimacy with yourself that you're in flight of, and that many people have the luxury of avoiding their whole lives. You will be forced to confront and to encounter for your healing. The problem becomes the solution. The problem was you become divorced from your true self, fragmentation of yourself, of your deepest self. The solution is this will force you to become whole, to be complete with yourself. And anything short of that is a temporary fix that will probably, God forbid, blow up even bigger than whatever it is that you were trying to fix beforehand. This is deep stuff.
In terms of what you were saying about the sexual transgression and transgression, I'm exploring these subjects. I'm not coming at it with the same religious conviction that you are, certainly, but I'm hearing it, it's making a lot of sense. So one of the things that I found very often with people who are sexually abused, and this was somewhat of my story, because I was abused by a teenager. So for a long time, my story was like, maybe he didn't do it on purpose. Maybe he didn't know what he's doing. Maybe he stopped doing it afterwards. Like, how can I hold a teenager accountable and everything else? And at a certain point in time, I don't know if it was seeing a picture of a teenage kid dressed in Hamas attire shooting a rocket that said, like, are you going to tell the guy on the other end of that rocket, oh, don't, like, put your leg back on? It was a teenager who shot the rocket. Like, yeah, everything is fine. I have to tell you what happened. So that was one. But another part, and this I've shared with a lot of people who are struggling with, was I sexually abused or not? And I remember this one guy who I spoke to, who his father was very concerned, not a Jewish guy, his father was very concerned for whatever reason that he was going to become gay when he was older. So he taught him he showed him porn, and he taught him how to, what to do with porn. So for him, he was at a very young age, 5, 6, 7 years old. So he heard me talking about abuse, and he shares his story with me. And he's like, was I sexually abused? Was my father teaching me? Was everything else? So I shared this with him, and since then I've shared it with many others. I said, maybe instead of saying, like, was I sexually abused, which is a confusing question, that's, was your sexuality abused? Yeah, like when I go sexually abused, I need a monster on the other end. Like, who is the monster who sexually abused me? What's my sexuality abused? I said, let's say a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, even a 12-year-old walked into a room and there was porn playing. And how did it get there? Whatever, a lightning strike. Okay, that's
nobody did
two wires
right.
together.
Act of
Nobody
God,
did it.
like they say in insurance. Yeah.
There it is. Okay, there's porn. Oh, he doesn't have a monster to point to and say, this guy took me into a back closet and did with me as he pleased to gratify him sexually. So he does. So this person's not sexually abused. Or would you say objectively that this friend of mine who I spoke about was introduced to sexuality at too young an age, his mind couldn't comprehend it, in a way that to this day doesn't make sense to him or to any therapist or anyone else he can share this with. And as a result, his sexuality was certainly abused. It was not treated with the sacredness and specialness and care that it needed. And as a result, there's effects. And of course, there's different levels of sexual abuse, both in terms of what you mentioned earlier, Rabbi Shais, complex. Did it happen? There is a difference with someone who is sexually abused one time or multiple times. Certainly, there is a difference between someone who is sexually abused in more horrible ways or less horrible ways. Of course, all of those things play a role. But we can objectively say in certain situations, and it's a much easier conclusion to come to, was someone's sexuality abused? And that's usually a very easy question to answer. And I guess if I'm looking back, right, taking a full circle to what you were saying, was my sexuality abused by myself?
Right. And
right?
since
Spending hours and hours watching pornography, was my sexuality abused by me?
And since you're accusing me of having greater religious conviction than you, which I'm not sure of, but I play one on TV, so I will say something that smacks of great religious conviction. If you're asking yourself, was any particular experience one in which my sexuality was abused, then you have to ask yourself, if to define abuse, you have to define proper use. So what's the proper use of sexuality? And the simple answer, to take something so grandiose and try to put it into a sentence, is sexuality is the problem is the solution. It's the one thing that makes us feel separate from God. And it's the one thing that unites us with God. So the proper use of sexuality is to feel oneness with God. And therefore the answer would be, was my sexuality abused? Did it do anything other than make you feel one with God? Then on some level, even on a very subtle level, that's an abuse of your sexuality. And we can and we deserve to have really high standards in this area, not because we're ashamed of ourselves, but rather because we value ourselves and we have really high standards for what sexuality should mean in our lives. And we have the goal. I'm speaking collectively for all of us. We do have the goal with, at the same time, a certain gentleness and compassion with ourselves about our human failings. But yes, we do have the goal that all sexuality should be something that creates more God consciousness and less self-consciousness.
Right. So at the risk, we're seeing even in this conversation, how easy it is, like in our conversation, to veer off and start sounding like fire and brimstone, or veer off and start sounding like the everything is like everything goes, right? It's like that, the wire is like the line is so thin between this is so sacred. I thought about sharing this before, not I haven't shared it publicly, so I'm afraid that I won't be able to do it with that I haven't refined my way of saying it yet enough to the point that it's with discretion, but I think the point is important enough, so I'll risk it. So I spoke about the people who've reached out to me right at the beginning stage, right? That those emails, those anonymous emails. But I've been on this path for 8 years, and I'm sure I have much more to learn from people who've been on it for many more years. We're talking about something that's at our essence. It's obviously infinite in terms of the perfection one can achieve in this arena. But one thing I do find that I stumbled on, and that's almost uniform in people who start this path of recovering from addiction, is this shift. I used a term earlier. I forget the term you use, like celibacy, right? It's this shift of almost like, okay, let me take this and throw it into the corner as far as possible. Okay, so I'm married. I need to, bring it out from time to time for some sort of reproductive reasons or something else. So, okay, so I will, but it's comes in and out, and it's not there's an anorexic quality almost to it, right? I'm eating and I'm throwing it up, right? There's not this, what you described as this unification or union with God or this connection. There's certainly not that feeling. There's this sexuality, which when I let out of the bag, destroyed me. And now I'm trying to get it back in the bag. And while I do have to let it out on occasion, in certain settings, I can't fully explore it or enjoy it or, anything else. And on a number of occasions, I shared with others, and I shared with, I found it myself, is that the goal in healing is not like to achieve, for lack of a better term, like worse sex. Like, okay, so here's like, this guy's having this incredible sex, right, with all sorts of people and being promiscuous and what we spoke about, right, the everything goes. And here comes the new approach,
The monk.
where what?
The monk.
Right. And no, so what we're talking about here, and what I think the goal is an experience of sex that is better than any other, physically better than any other.
Of course. Certainly, yes.
So that actually having, and this is what I tell people, that's why that the goal, when I come into recovery, like now the way I see it, I'm not here to control my sexuality anymore. I'm here now, and the goal and destination is to have the best sex life.
Yeah, but that sounds terrible if people don't understand what it means.
Right. It's right. It's right. And that's
that,
why
that soundbite is the worst soundbite, unless you listen to the 2 hours that came before it. Then you realize what Ellie's saying, that there's this thing that is part and parcel with my identity as a human being. It's imprinted in the human psyche since the time of the tree of knowledge. We can't run from it. We can't hide from it. And yet we can't master it. We can't own it. When we try to control it, it consumes us. Ultimately, the only thing we can do is to surrender to it as a divine power, to surrender to it as a divine power. It's bigger than me. If I'm going to try to control it, I'm going to be made a fool of every single time. And that's the demoralization that you're talking about. Here, right. I'm going to control it. And then, what a sucker I was. To think
right. And there's two ways to control it. One is I put it in the closet, right? Or there's this movie on porn addiction I watch on. It's called Thanks for Sharing. And this guy says, emotions are like kids. You don't want them in the trunk, but you don't want them driving the car either.
That's good. That's like,
so it's kind of like, right. So it's like sexuality, right?
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to put it in the trunk, but you don't want to drive in the car. Like everything goes wherever it wants to take me. It takes me. There's certain parameters. The reason I said it is because the reason I brought that up, because I knew it was sensitive, and I clarified in that way, is that it's kind of what you referred to earlier with the sur meira and ase taiv, right? That what we're going here is not just like, okay, refrain, abstain, refrain, abstain, refrain, abstain. No, that's not what we're talking about. So we're talking about intimacy, greater connection, greater love, a deeper, a much deeper, I'm not talking about sex now, I'm talking about just in general, like the overall. We're not talking about, okay, I'm afraid of connection, so I'm going to sit here huddled in a corner with a few people who also have the same secret and share with them. In a meeting, if you walk in, what do you hear normally? A lot of laughter, right? A very pleasant atmosphere for the most part. You can have someone struggling, but warm embraces when you come in, loud talking, right? There's a very often uproarious laughter in meetings. And I know I was surprised by that. It's like, okay, I'm coming to this serious, dark, dingy corner. And oftentimes that they are, right? They're often not, they don't have good funding or funders. They don't do charity campaigns, these places. But what you do find, by and large, which is the attraction, is you find people enjoying life. You find people who are on the happier end of the spectrum, not like, I'm so miserable. And maybe that's a better way of saying it. You're not finding someone who's like, oh, I can't drink alcohol anymore, poor me. No, you're saying the alcohol was good, right? It was good. I enjoyed it, and it was a lot of fun, but it always had the side effects and always had the risks. And now I found a way to have more fun with less risks. And I'm much happier than I ever was. I didn't go from poor me, I can't have a good life, so I had to cut out all these things and I become a monk. Just the opposite. And I think the same is true with sexuality. And that's why I think the fire and brimstone isn't necessary. We're not promoting a lifestyle with any of these things. And I think the same is true with probably what I think I've heard you speak about that, just in terms of Orthodox Judaism and Hasidus and everything else. About poor me, I have to live this lifestyle. No, I get to live this lifestyle, right? That's same message. It's not poor
Look,
me. I'm addicted to
we
porn.
understand that
I can't enjoy
everything
it.
that in this world is the way that it is because it is the manifestation of a spiritual paradigm, then spiritual health is the source of all other health, physical, emotional, social. So it's not possible that we would do something that would be morally better and it would cause dysfunction. And I'll flip that statement as well and say, if something's causing dysfunction, maybe it's not really as moral as you think. Even though
Right.
you might think that's what Torah wants you to do, but maybe actually the fact that it's causing so much dysfunction is you need to get a better idea of what Torah would actually guide you to do. And I think that's happening a lot, is that well-intending people, earnest, sincere people are trying to do the right thing and causing themselves not only more emotional pain, but more religious failure by trying to do something that they believe their religion is compelling them to do. So just to spell this out, because I know this is very confusing, again, bottom line, we want people to be free from all types of misuse of human sexuality. And we want people to be free to engage in God's intended purpose for sexuality.
And when it's done in that way, there's less shame, less guilt, and a deeper experience on all levels: physical, spiritual,
And
emotional.
when it's done in that way,
relational.
it will be aligned on all levels. Correct. Now, let's be honest, most people who come to, let's say, their first 12-step meeting aren't doing it because they're looking to explore deeper intimacy. No one's coming in for that reason at their first meeting. They're coming because my life's falling apart. I hate myself. It's either this or die. So in early recovery, you don't talk a whole lot about, the ultimate alignment of the spiritual, the physical, of what does intimacy really mean, and how can you bring your sexuality into your connection with oneness. That's not something that somebody in their first 24 hours is probably ready to hear.
Right. I became more sensitive. Like as I was thinking about who might be on this call, I thought there may be a number of people listening in now or in the future who have already shared their secrets, have already embarked on a path, or already, in recovery for a period of time, but they're still feeling some of that shame. There's still that feeling. And just saying, share your secret, write that email, send that message, book that session with a therapist is not the answer for that person, because they're past that. So what is the message to them is that we're not here to get away from the worst parts of life. We're here to embrace the best of life. If recovery doesn't offer me everything that addiction did, the good parts of addiction, right? Everything that it did on like times 10, then why would I go? Why do I want to be there? If I had that great feeling of sitting with my friends in the bar, laughing and drinking, and like that was a highlight of my week, why would I trade that for recovery where I don't get to sit and, hang out with my friends laughing? Like I love that experience. Yeah, there was some other stuff that weren't there. And I think oftentimes these lifestyles are presented as this sort of ascetic lifestyle. We're moving away
Right. Very
from
austere,
all of these things.
very
Correct.
Spartan. But Ellie, I want to go even deeper than that, because it's not just, I used to have such a good time having fun with my friends at the bar. Okay, let's go deeper than that. You're talking about what was the addiction doing? What was it? What purpose was it serving? Because
Right.
if it didn't serve a purpose, no one would do it. Obviously,
You
it's
wouldn't
serving
do
a
it.
purpose. Right.
Especially not considering the cost most people see it exacts in
Correct.
their life.
Correct. So obviously,
life.
it's serving some type of purpose. Okay, what purpose is it serving? So you could say fun, you could say pleasure, but I want to go deeper than that. I want to go deeper than that. There are experiences which are sufficiently intense enough, whether they be through chemicals or whether they be other types of stimulus. But these experiences are stimulating enough and they're intense enough to draw me out of myself for a short period of time, and to be free from, to finally be relieved from myself, from my own self-consciousness, my own self-awareness, my own thoughts, the self-talk, which is incessant, the self-awareness, the terminal uniqueness of always looking around and feeling, where do I belong? Are people looking at me? Where do I fit in? What do people think about me? All of this deep, deep, deep stuff that's almost unavoidable, inescapable, because it's like that is identity, that is self-concept, and it can become unrelenting. It can become just, it wears away at a person, and they need an escape. Where can I go? Where can I escape from me? Wherever I go, there I am. And then you find an experience which is sufficiently intense enough, whether it's pleasurable or it's numbing, or it's different people seek different types of self-medication. Some people like high, some people like low. Some people like adrenaline, some people like heroin, some people like dopamine. The point is, I have an experience which is intense enough and stimulating enough that it allows me to have an escape from me for a moment. And that's what every addiction really does. That's the purpose that it serves. And so when you say, will recovery give me what I used to find in the addiction before it started having too many side effects, the answer is, not only will recovery give you what you were looking for in the addiction, but what you were trying to get out of the addiction all along was what you only could have found in recovery. And that is the only real way to be free from the bondage of self. The only real way to transcend ego and that feeling of separateness is through union with God. And that's why the solution here is the problem turned on its head. The problem is, it's an intimacy destroyer. It destroys relationships with other human beings. It destroys relationships with your own self. It destroys relationships between you and God. It's an intimacy destroyer.
Both porn and shame are, both of them, whichever subject.
They're synonymous.
Correct.
It's all one thing. That's why it's a destroyer of intimacy. Because it draws attention to the self-concept. That's why sexual abuse is so devastating, because it forces somebody to look at their own selfhood before they're ready to, in a way that's far too intense to look at it before they're ready to, in ways that are unsafe and jarring and shocking to the system. The point is that selfhood and sexuality are synonymous, and always have been since the time of the tree of knowledge. And the two are inseparable. And therefore, if it's tragic to describe the cycle again, but if my experience of sexuality is making me more self-conscious, and let's say the self-consciousness is specifically my own self-loathing about my sexual failures, what's going to happen is that I'm going to seek out more distraction from that, which is going to cause me more self-obsession. So the only way, and here's the answer to the people who are asking, well, what do we actually do? What do we do? You know what you do? You find God. Oh, but God's been my problem because I have all this religious guilt. No. Put aside the religious guilt for a second. Find God. Can you find God in your story of failure? Can you find God in your story of feeling separate, alone, isolated? Can you find God in this story? Can you somehow see how the culmination of this journey will bring you closer to him? The tshuva ma'ava, like it talks about in Tanya in chapter 7, that when you return out of love, so then darkness becomes light and the sins become merits. Can you say that if not for this assault to my selfhood, which made me hyper self-aware, I would never have been able to achieve this level of surrender where I can be this self-transcendent, this humble, this selfless, this service-oriented, as opposed to self-oriented? So you want to know the solution? This is the solution. The solution isn't giving yourself ultimatums, taking an oath, a solemn vow, making promises, hearing scarier fire and brimstone speeches. The solution is to realize that you're in search of wholeness. You're in search of intimacy with God. And that means vulnerability, and that means facing all of your fears. See, who knew? If someone knew that becoming addicted to porn meant that in order to recover, they'd have to face all of their fears, they would never start watching porn, because who wants to face all of their fears? But this is what we're talking about. We're talking about deep healing. A healing of what? What part of me was broken? What part of me was injured? What part? Not a part. Your essence. And therefore, it is your essence which is going to be healed. And it's your essence which is going to be revealed through this process, which is an amazing thing. And no one could ever give you permission to purposely engage in such a descent for the sake of a radical ascent. If you would ask someone, are you allowed to fall so low in order to rise so high? No, you're not allowed. Premeditated? Never, God forbid. Anyone says, I'm going to purposely sin in order to return? No, you're not allowed. But we're talking about someone who already's there. They don't need to go out and find a way to fall. They've fallen. How can you take that fall and see it in the continuum, in the bigger picture, as a story of true healing of your essence and of your intimate connection with God? And if it's anything short of that, it's not powerful enough. And dare I say, if it's anything less than that, it wouldn't be worth. It wouldn't be enough of a payoff to have to go through the hell that it takes to go through in order to get to it.
Right. I'm going to share a story. I think it connects well with what you're saying, but maybe it's a little jarring, but it's true. It's a true story. So this guy reached out to me years ago. He reached out to me, and somehow I missed his message. It was when I was talking about sexual abuse and doing those speeches. And then he gave up. I think he had tried through, I don't know, Facebook or a different medium. And when he saw me do a talk on porn addiction, he reached out to me again. It's like 5 years later. And the first time I spoke to him, like I knew there was like a really, really shameful secret he was holding on to. I just saw it. He was asking me a lot of questions. He shared his first name, but he wasn't telling me much. And I just sensed that there was a really shameful secret he was holding on to. So I said, listen, if I haven't done it myself, a friend of mine has, like, you're asking me questions about sexual abuse, sexuality, like these kind of things. Like I've heard the story, or I've been there myself. It's, just, you can speak comfortably. Like, you're in a safe place. Just say what you need to say. You're not going to knock me off my feet. I'll be okay. So he shares with me that he was abused sexually more times than he can imagine. And the abuse never really stopped. Like there isn't a clear day that his abuse So, for example, he entered into a kind of relationship with a man who was 20 years older than his, was sexually abusing him. And it continued into adulthood. So it started as a teenager and continued into adulthood. So at what day was he a consenting adult? And in what day was he a child who was being abused by this adult? This was someone who grew up from. Eventually, that became, for lack of a better term, his orientation. It's what he wasn't sure. Was this who he was attracted to? Was it not? It was the only thing he ever knew. He was only with men, and he was in his late 30s, davening every day, tefillin, like the works. His life was from Shabbos, kosher, everything else. But this was like this part of him that he could not reconcile. He absolutely couldn't reconcile with. And we started speaking fairly regularly. And I say that's why there isn't like a solution. Like I've never been able to, I like that you're saying that, because I've never been able to find it myself or offer someone. I go to one meeting, I get the magic bullet, I read one book, I get the magic bullet. It quite literally is when someone asks me about porn, I say whatever it takes. Like addiction, you embark on the path of whatever it takes in order to kick this. And whatever it takes is going to take you to different places. And for me, you want me to tell you my story? Whatever it takes is me right here, right now, inclusive. Does that mean that this is going to be your path in 8-9 years because you started? Maybe, yeah, maybe no. It's each soul has its expression, and each person has his journey and his way of his way of going. But
can I
enter on the
stop
path
you for a second?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if everybody caught that. Were you just
Go
saying
ahead.
that right now, being here right now, talking right now is part of your recovery?
Correct. Yes, of course.
Okay, I don't know if that was clear to everyone. See, I think they think that it was some revolutionary thing that happened for you, and now you're free. Now you're out of it. You said it before. What is out of it? This that you and I are talking right now, and we're connecting, and we're connecting on a very deep level. I mean, we're talking about spirituality. We're talking about psychology. We're talking, about emotions. This connection we're having right now is part of your recovery and part of your journey from a place that when you were in it, you were feeling disconnection.
Correct.
Okay. So I just want people to hear what we were really describing when we're talking about the healing journey.
Right. It's start and it's over. It may take on a different form. When I started, they told me come to a meeting every day for 90 days. Okay. Now it doesn't look like that, but there's no less a commitment to the process. And the same thing happens. Like it can easily reverse itself. There isn't this sense of I am cured. There's a sense of I found things that work for me, and I continue to do them.
And if you start, spell it out. And if you start self-isolating and feeling self-pity,
right,
you could reverse, God forbid.
Yeah, and no, and I've experienced that, and I've experienced those processes. Years of, not I want to say sober. Sober is not a good word because dead people are sober too. Years of being in a place that I felt like, it doesn't mean no bad days, but I felt. I say I wasn't thinking about drinking. I wasn't thinking about not drinking. Right. Years of feeling liberation from it. Years of, I'm talking about not watching porn because that's the way my service expresses itself today. But I'm not thinking about not watching porn. I'm not like, okay, don't go here or go there. It's not, I had a lock on my phone for years as an example. I don't have a lock on my phone today. I'm not like every single website. I got to be careful not that my fingers don't type. And it was like that for a while. So it changes, it evolves. But there's no less a commitment to the process of I'm doing certain things in order to maintain the level of freedom that I have, and I know that it can revert back. And I want to bring back to this individual. So he's struggling mightily, and his addiction is manifesting itself in all ways, pixels, people, everything. And obviously he has this additional level of shame that his addiction is expressing itself with people of the same sex. And the fact that he's still religious, but it's the only thing he knows. And, He said, I've tried to date women. I can't. What am I? Should I tell them? Should I not tell them? There's nowhere to go for me. So I asked him, I said, you say you pray every day, right? You daven every day. Who do you pray to? It's God. So where is he in the story? Where is he in your story? So what do you mean, where is he in my story? I said, was he there when you were abused? The first time, the second time, the third time, right? Was he there all those times? He says, I don't know what that means, right? I said, either he was there or he wasn't there. Was he there? Okay, yes, he was there. Okay, are you angry at him? How can you be angry at God? Like, why can't you be angry at God? I said, a relationship, or it's not. I'd be pretty angry. This guy sent me on this journey. I'm angry. I mean, if that's where it starts, if that's where the communication has to start, that's where the communication has to start. Should it start? I'm going to repeat the same sentence. Okay, it says Maida Ani, Baruch Atah. Okay, same thing in the world, but that's not what you're feeling right now, right? The relationship is going to start with, hey, what the hell, right? I've shared sometimes, almost everyone that I've worked with, I've advised them to write 2 letters. The thank you letter to porn and the F you letter to God, right? I don't mean literally, right? F you letter, but there's probably some anger in your story. There's some resentment, and you're trying to get to a path, you said, of having a relationship with God. So where's it at now? Where's the relationship now? If my God doesn't have big enough shoulders to hear my anger, to hear my disappointment, to ask me why, as an 8-year-old child, he decided to drag me into this guy's room and abuse me, that was my path. And if he wasn't part of the equation, then what? Then who is he? And if he was part of the equation, then why did he do that? But I said the only thing is, when you ask the question, be prepared that there might be a response. Right? It's like, why do you do that to me? Okay, be prepared. There may be a response. You may actually find, as you go through your story, you may find something beautiful in it. You may actually find a reason or a beauty or some gem that can be uncovered from the fact that you went into it in that way. And it took a long time, probably 3 or 4 conversations, for him to feel comfortable to write the letter, to just start like, God. I think the way he started, he shared the letter with me. God, I'm angry with you. And to me, sometimes that's the way when we say we want to drag God into the story. He's got to be able to meet us. If he's big enough, if his shoulders are big enough, he's got to meet us where we're at. And that's where we're at right now. I've all this anger and all this resentment at either this entity didn't do it, right? I said either God, either I hate him or he doesn't exist, right? So I went back and forth between those 2 things. So if I'm accepting that he exists, okay, so I'm in the hate right now, and I have to be able to express that. And that itself, to me, is where the process started, and where I encourage others to start the process, is start there and start that level of communication and dialogue, but be open to hear something in response. And in my own case, I found it, and I've shared with others, that if I was writing my own story, if I was given authorship over it, and I've heard this, tell me if I'm right, that the soul enters into a contract before it enters the world, and it does get authorship over its story, and it chooses to go through its experiences that it does. So the way I say it now is that if I was given the pen and say, Ellie, write your own story, I would choose those most difficult moments from childhood. And then the moments more recently, there's certainly some moments in the last couple of years that I would not choose to add to it. Okay, so now I say that those have to be worked on. Those are the experiences that God needs to be brought into. He hasn't been brought into yet because I'm not accepting of it. Is that soul contract point? Have you heard that? That a soul, before it enters the world, signs up? Is that a Jewish concept?
When Hashem created the world, it says, B'mi nimlach, with whom did Hashem consult? It says he consulted with the neshamas. So it's not only that the soul has agency, but it's that kaviyachol, so to speak, Hashem gave us authority over the whole project, whether or not he should create everything the creation means, with all of the difficulties that entails for each of us. So it's like, when did I ever sign up for this? Sign up for it? You created it. You created it.
Right, you're saying not right. Okay, partner in creating it. Right. Okay, I hear that, but there's a collective to it. Okay, so maybe it wasn't like my soul that was engaged in it. The way I heard it, right? The way I heard it was, let's say someone grew up in intense poverty, right? A very, very intense poverty, that's crushing poverty. The soul before it, the world, is, do you agree to enter the world knowing that you're going to go through the experience of the physical pain of intense poverty, or maybe of losing a parent very young, or maybe being sexually abused, or maybe an addiction? And until the soul says, I'm in, doesn't get it. I don't know where I heard this, but I heard it.
The question is, getting back to the theme, tonight's title of tonight's discussion. If your soul knew before it came to the world what it would mean to have a body and the wiring neurologically and biochemically, what it meant to be a sexual being, and the challenge that inherently entails, and the risk, the major risk involved there, would your soul accept such a mission? And I think part of healing for anyone who's watching this and they're still in the middle of the struggle, I think part of healing is to be able to answer that question and say, yes, my soul would be willing to face this specific challenge. And anything short of that. What do I mean? Anything short of that. What I mean is an attempt to just sort of say, look, this is a weakness and I'm going to master it. I'm going to get stronger. I'm going to get on top of it. I'm going to get control over it. Okay, so try that. So try it. And if that works, that's fantastic. I'm only concerned with the bottom line. Obviously, the net results are what matters to me. So if you can, by willpower, say, I'm going to get a handle on this and I'm going to get more motivated. I'm going to read some more Fire and Brimstone, and then I'm going to stop and I'm going to get control over it. If that works for you, that's fantastic. But what you may find is that the very fact that this issue is so uniquely all-consuming is because it is calling upon you to engage in a solution that is uniquely all-consuming.
I love that.
And to examine your entire life and existence and purpose. So with all apologies to the people who want practical tricks and tips. Yeah, so what's the practical tip and trick? 8 years into your sobriety journey, do a podcast with a rabbi for 3 hours. I mean, that's your journey. It's every person out there is going to have a unique journey, but what's clear is it's going to call upon your essence, nothing less than that. And it's going to call upon you to enter with your essence into an intimate relationship with God's essence, nothing less than that.
So I want to refine you. So you're saying that these things crush our essence,
yeah,
and engage our essence.
Yes.
And then the solution is to do that, to fully engage our essence.
Yes.
And then all of these experiences, the ones that we felt shameful for, the one we felt guilty of, the one we felt angry at God for, and everything else, we see it as part and parcel of engaging our essence. Like had this not happened, and that's, I share with people, is that some people go through a specific level of pain, experience a specific level of pain. And I don't think there's a threshold for everyone. I think anyone who has children knows that there's we come in with different sensitivities. So some may be, on paper, it wasn't such a crazy experience, but they're very sensitive to.
There's no one definition of rock bottom.
Right. There's no one definition of rock bottom, but there's also no one definition of a difficult experience.
Right.
It's two people can go through identical homes, twins practically, right? Identical experiences, same level of property. One is right. They can't find themselves, and the other seems to be okay. So what my experience, when someone reaches a certain level of pain in their life, whatever that is, then it's kind of like they don't have the choice. Or the way you said it in God of Our Understanding is everyone's going to benefit from spirituality, right? But for the average person, it's a luxury. For the addict, it's a necessity. Like there's a certain level of pain that call it a blessing, call it not. It engages you and say, okay, you have no choice. For you, spirituality is a necessity. Okay, the other person may or may not find it, but there's a select group of people who are chosen. They're going to find it. They're going to have to find it. It's a necessity for them to experience any sort of peace in their life. And sometimes it looks right. What's nice about it, my sponsor says, recovery. Recovery is recovery is unpredictable. The addiction is very predictable. The addiction, you know where you're going. You know what's going to happen, right? You know where you're going. You know they're going to feel. Okay, there's some variety. You're the kind of addict, who doesn't like whiskey every night, right? Sometimes you like bourbon. Sometimes you like, a couple of beers. That's the level of variety. But you're getting to the same feeling. You're getting to the same place. And there's something about, he says, recovery. You enter a path. You don't know where you're going. You don't know where it's going to take you. And the demand is almost of a spiritual or not quite like something you can put your finger on and it just moves in that direction and it unfolds and it takes you where it needs to take you and you go where you need to go. And some are kind of thrust into that path. And it's like, okay, you either do this or you feel this existential terminal uniqueness, self-consciousness. Yeah.
Right.
Can you address the I don't know if you see the Q&A. There's a last question over there. I can address it, but
yeah, I see the Q&A.
Yeah, the last one where it says, but addiction allows the freeing. So it's anonymous. People don't see the names other than, I think, us. So we don't have to mention the name, but just the question.
But addiction allows the freeing of self at any time.
Yeah.
I want it. I'm sitting here telling God to come, but he doesn't. If I spark my blunt, I have it on demand. Yeah. Well, see, that's the opposite of intimacy. That is what can this thing or this person do for me right now? I'm burdened with self-consciousness, and some things make my self-consciousness feel better. Some things make my self-consciousness feel worse, but that's it. I'm stuck in that trap. So I'm going to seek out pleasure. I'm going to try to avoid pain, and I'm going to evaluate everything based on what it can do for me. And that's how I'll look at people. What can people do for me? And when seeking out pleasure and avoiding pain becomes one's entire preoccupation, that may be synonymous with addiction. Maybe that would be a one working definition of addiction, where I have no other job than to figure out how to not feel bad and try to feel good. Recovery would be the exact opposite. I'm not going to try to manage what makes me feel one way or another. I'm not even going to try. That's not my job anymore. My job is not to figure out what's going to make me feel good and what's going to make me feel bad. My job is to be of service. Hineni, like you said, recovery can look so many different ways because you're just writing a blank check That's it. I'm showing up. Whatever I'm going to be called upon to do, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm here, reporting for duty, sir. So, when you describe, I call God, he doesn't come on demand. If I take my drug of choice, boom, it's obedient, it's faithful, it's reliable, does the trick until it doesn't anymore, or until it does, but it lasts for 2 seconds and the consequences last for 2 months or whatever diminishing return there may be. But that's the addiction. What is it going to do for me? Come, I called you. Come on, get over here. The recovery is the exact opposite. I'm reporting to God and saying, I'm here for you. How can you use me? How can I be of service at this moment? How can I do something for one of your children? What am I going to get out of it? I stopped worrying about what I'm going to get out of it. I can't go down that road. Some people, maybe they can dabble casually in what makes me feel good, what makes me feel bad. No, I can't go down that road. I have to just be surrendered. I have to be mission driven. And if I do that, everything else will work itself out. Like we were speaking about before, if I'm spiritually healthy, then everything else is going to come into alignment sooner or later. And it's going to be good for me on all levels, psychologically, emotionally, socially, physically, emotionally. So when this person in the Q&A is describing, he's not as reliable as my drug of choice. That's right. That's exactly the point. Recovery isn't realizing, oh, God is a better drug than all the drugs. It's realizing that what I was trying to get by filling myself up, I'm never going to get. But if I forget about filling myself up and I just try to be of service to others and to my maker, something wild happens. And that peace and that relief and that freedom from pain that I was seeking, it crept up on me as a side benefit of trying to live a useful life. So, you're sitting here, you're talking to me, probably your most conscious motivation is it may help somebody. Now, does it make you feel good? Probably also makes you feel good. But that's not why you're doing it. That's a side benefit. The minute you start doing these things because it makes you feel good, that becomes your new addiction. And then that can turn on you, will turn on you. So this is about flipping the whole paradigm. I'm not trying to self-medicate. I'm not trying to numb. I'm not trying to make yourself comfortable anymore. I'm reporting for duty in God's reality as he's making it this moment, prepared to feel completely uncomfortable. And then something wild.
So there's someone, I was talking to someone the other day, and this guy who's of means and gives money. And he said, I told myself a couple of years ago, I was like enjoying it too much from seeing my name on stuff that I have to do everything anonymously. It's coming from arrogance. So I said, okay, I hear it. So he said, what do you think about that? So I said, I think you'd make a weak soldier. So he said, what do you mean? I said, if the general gives the order, give this one anonymously. And the next one, he gives the order, give this one publicly. You're only capable of listening to one of the orders. You're not much of a soldier. So
right.
That's been we always get to a certain point in a conversation. That's been like an interesting part of kind of my journey, where my instinct is always to kind of be behind the scenes, to not be public. I had a very powerful fear of public speaking at a certain point in time. When I got into recovery, my fear of sharing in the meetings with 6 people, 7 people was so palpable.
Wow.
But slowly that started pushing out, and like it turned the whole thing on its head, where a lot of stuff that I saw as my personality, I'm a loner, I'm quiet, I'm private, this for whatever reason, I didn't plan some of these things. I felt a moment of inspiration. I said, I have to do a TED talk. And I just felt that feeling, and I felt where I thought it was coming. So, okay, that has to happen. And then from there, one to another. But it's
so when you write
in
your
some
bullet
ways
points for how to recover, you have to give a TED talk. It's one of the bullet points. How do you recover?
Right.
You have to give a TED talk.
Right.
Right.
That was literally experience. And you say, you know what? You start saying yes. You start, even this one, we said, you mentioned it as an idea. You said, hey, I said, okay, it's coming. Let's have this conversation about shame. But I see the risk, right? You say there's always the, what do you call, like the occupational hazards? Like each one presents itself with a different risk. So the point you're making over here, because you say, okay, like you start liking this mission after us. Okay, I enjoy this. All right, this one's a fun one. This one's meaningful. This one's everything else. And then that too becomes, and then you become a poor soldier again, because maybe the next mission is very, very different.
Mhm.
So very interesting. Okay, maybe over there we went a little past, a little over some heads, but
It's okay.
it's okay.
It's okay, because there will be one person who's ready, and they'll hear this and they'll say, this sounds way more demanding than I ever dreamed it would be, but it sounds right. And you'll get an email, or I'll get an email from this person. Maybe not today, but I'll tell you one thing that I've learned from experience. Any time I've gone out publicly speaking about this kind of stuff, there's always one person. Sometimes it happens the next day. Sometimes it happens a month later, a year later. There's always one person who says that I was at a turning point in my life, and this came at the perfect moment. So, we're putting it out there for whoever, but for one person, it's worth it.
No, I've had that. I shared at the beginning of this about Brene Brown and the shame, and I remember being in a incredibly dark place one night and seeing her TED talk on what was it called? It was on shame. It was on vulnerability. I think it was something about vulnerability, the power of vulnerability, something. And I watched that talk, and from that talk, I reached out to someone for help. I remember that. So you never know. They live there, and that spark is, 2 a.m. after another bout of way too much porn and feeling completely demoralized, and then feeling like I'm supposed to feel good because my business is doing okay. So I don't even get to feel shame, because who am I going to call and say, like, I'm feeling miserable? I say, what do you have to complain about? Right.
See, I'm not so worried about how many people are on the Zoom right now. What I'm thinking about is the person who's watching this. It's now 5 a.m. Okay, this is 2 hours and 50 whatever minutes into this recording. They started watching it, like you said, at 2 a.m. after a bout. And now it's
probably
5.
watching them in double speed. It's not so bad.
And
you can't watch me on double speed, by the way. You can't watch me on double speed. Maybe 1 1/4. You can't turn me on double speed.
Okay. So
someone told me that. It says, Ellie, you do these very long podcasts, and I can't put on double speed. You talk too fast.
So we'll say it's 4 a.m. It's 4 a.m. And that's the person who this is for. This is the person who's watching this, and it's 4 a.m. right now. Hi, how you doing? Ellie, speak to the person who it's 4 a.m. right now, and he's ready to change. He's listening. She's listening. They are listening right now.
What's that message? And I guess we'll wrap it up on this this note, so Joe Rogan doesn't feel threatened at the length of our podcast and comes after us. Someone who's at that place. I wonder if we scared them, because had I known,
We scared off everybody else. I'm telling you right now, the only one watching is the person saying, they see right into me. How do they know all this about me? Tell me what to do and I'll do it. So go ahead.
There's one person left.
Yeah, there's one guy left, but it's fine. It's all for him or her.
Right. I think you get to a place that you not you get to a place. You'll get to a place. Someone who embarks on this path will get to this place where they feel, and it's not from an arrogant place, it's not from an egotistical place. They feel that there's a unique contribution that they can make. Not that they can make, that they need to make. Literally, that they need to make. It needs to be made. And they'll feel it. They'll feel it deeply. They'll feel it intensely. And that day exists on the horizon by following this path. And once that's there, that feeling, it doesn't quite leave us. It can be felt more intensely or less intensely, but that feeling of, it's not I matter, it's more than I matter. It's that I'm important to this machine. There's a role that's so perfect, so specific, and all of the experiences and all of the challenges, especially the challenge, not all of them, especially the challenges, especially those most difficult moments. And I like the way you spoke about it in terms of engaging the essence. Like these experiences engage the essence, not engage, they crush the essence. And by crushing the essence, they engage the essence. So now the essence is here, it's engaged, and that's what we need. We need your essence. And that's, so while it's hard to imagine, because when you're feeling in that place, it's like, okay, not me, I'll never get there. If you're listening this late, I encourage you to trust me and embark on the path. I think the path often starts by asking for help and then listening to the answer. When in that question that you answered, the person said, I tell God to come and he doesn't come. So maybe stop telling him. Stop telling him what to do, ask him. And then see what happens. It's a different experience. And calling someone and asking for help, but then listening to their response and listening to what it is they offer and the path they take it on. I remember that day when I called the person who became my first sponsor. And I'd already spoken with him, I already had the lunch, I already seen a little bit, right? I'd gone to a couple of meetings, but I'm like, do I really need this? Do I really need to cut it all out? Is there a way that I can still have some of it? Okay, so it got too much. Fine. But I got to go to these meetings with these crazies. Is this what I have to step into? And I'm not saying for everyone's path, it's 12 steps. It's not, everyone has a different path and people have found meaning and purpose and value and peace in many different ways. For me, it was the meetings. I remember after this, I called him. I was desperate. I just acted out and it did nothing for me. It did nothing for me, which brings me to the second part of this question. If I spark my blunt, I have it on demand. For now, I had it the same way. I had a ritual that was my go-to ritual in my toughest moments. And I didn't want to go to it too often. Without going to the specifics, it's not relevant. I didn't want to go to it too often because I was afraid I would burn it out. I was afraid if it became commonplace, even though it was accessible, it was something that I could do as often as I wanted. I said I reserve it for special occasions. And this was what a special occasion mean, that I felt like hell. And I went on this occasion, engaged in this special ritual, and I walked out feeling nothing. It didn't hit the spot. It didn't do anything for me. I felt the same pain I felt before, I felt afterwards. And I walked out of that place and I said, oh man, what's next? Where does this go to from here? Fortunately, I had this guy's number because I'd gone to a couple of meetings and my therapist introduced me to him. I remember that feeling when I called him and I called him, I said, tell me what I got to do. Anything. I need your help. Anything. Tell me what I got to do. And he gave me a very modest list to start. It was a very, very modest list. But the question, and that's what I'm That's what I'm recommending. That's that whole long to do was call someone and ask for help, but ask for help. Don't tell them to help you. Ask for help. I called this person. I chose this person. It was him, not someone else. And he had his direction that he gave to me. In that moment, trust it. You're speaking from your essence. That guy will speak from your essence. That guy or girl will speak from his essence. You're going to get a message that's for you. And I got a message that seemed to be simple, but landed me on a path that I'm still on today and I'll never leave.
Okay.
Chase, it's on you.
No, there's nothing else to say. I think that help is out there. People know where to find help. And I respect the fact that you're being very humble and not insisting that people find the same solution that you found. You're saying for you, it was the 12-step program. And you're being very humble and you're saying it doesn't have to be that for everybody. And that you've seen people who found other solutions.
I'm not saying for porn I found other solutions. Other problems have other solutions.
Right. So you've said what worked for you. You've described it very clearly, that it's not just go to a couple meetings for a few weeks. It's a lifetime devotion to service, selflessness, being true to your deepest self and your deepest mission. And it becomes a lot more than just how to not watch porn.
Correct. It's almost a how many meetings do I go to today that I even hear the word porn in it? Very few. That's less than half.
I'll tell you something. If you go to a really, really good meeting, you wouldn't even know which fellowship you're at.
That's true.
You wouldn't know if
That's
it's SA or AA or NA, because they're talking about the same thing.
Right.
Giving our life and our will over to the care of God, being of service, and that's it. You would hardly know why they ended up there.
The only thing I'll add is be prepared to be misunderstood. It's not so bad, but just be prepared for it.
Uh-huh. If a person's already feeling isolated, like saying already nobody understands you. So, okay, so you'll have something good and people won't understand it. You're saying the people will misunderstand your recovery.
Yeah, I'm saying that's it. Like, be prepared to be misunderstood. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
No, it's not a bad thing.
you want to know something funny though? Somebody talks about their addiction, why they like pornography, they won't be misunderstood.
Right.
If they talk about their solution, how they found God and living life on God's terms and being of service, then they will be misunderstood.
Yeah. They say, Ellie, how do you have time for this stuff? I said, when I was going to strip clubs, no one asked me how I had time. I never had to explain it. Yeah. Suddenly I'm taking a phone call from someone. Ellie, how do you have time to take a phone call from someone? Okay, because I don't go to strip clubs anymore.
Uh-huh.
All right. On that note, Rabbi Shais, as always,
Yeah.
it was wonderful speaking with you. I'm inspired.
Okay, good.
And I hope we get to do it again.
Anytime. Ellie, you call anytime, I'll be there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. But don't wait for my call. I won't wait for yours. We'll wait for a higher
call. When he calls.
When he calls, he's got 2 soldiers.
That's right.
Have a good night.
Good night.